Chapter 87. Breakfast the morning after Dumbledore's shocking and unexpected demise was, in the grand, unsettling tapestry of Hogwarts life, eerily unchanged. The Great Hall, usually a tempest of noise and energy, pulsed with a low, familiar thrum of routine. Sunlight, pale and hesitant, streamed through the high windows, illuminating dust motes dancing over the familiar scarred oak tables. Most of the older students, the 6th and 7th years, were hunched like academic vultures over their textbooks and parchment, their faces etched with the familiar stress of impending owls and newts. The younger years, blessedly oblivious to the cataclysm that had transpired in the headmaster's office, gossiped with the ceaseless, charming triviality of youth. Their chatter was a predictable mix, the latest gossip about the opposite sex, the merits of the next Quidditch match, and the inevitable drama of school life. It was a picture of perfect, unsettling normalcy that Harry watched from his doors of the great entrance hall for what felt like an eternity. His gaze, however, was perpetually drawn to the staff table, a focal point of his current, highly volatile plan. It was there he noticed Professor McGonagall radiating an almost palpable aura of rigid anxiety. She was stirring her porridge with a furious, unnecessary vigor, her eyes flicking repeatedly, and with deep concern toward the majestic, ornate, and now ominously vacant headmaster's chair. The silence emanating from that empty seat was deafening to Harry. It confirmed his suspicion, a cold, clinical fact upon which he and Tom had built their entire strategy. The news of Dumbledore's violent death had not yet permeated the ancient stones and wards of Hogwarts. The school was still operating on the assumption that the great headmaster was merely indisposed, perhaps away on one of his inscrutable, mysterious errands. A sliver of grim satisfaction curled in Harry's stomach. This silence, this temporary ignorance, was a precious, vital gift. It bought them time Harry desperately needed to execute the final, most delicate phase of their plot. He needed a clean, uninterrupted opportunity to present their new way of thinking, a philosophy forged in the depths of dark ambition and radical change, to the faculty and the students. This period of unwitting peace was the buffer they required, the calm before the storm from which he and Tom would emerge, undeniably and spectacularly victorious, their hard-won efforts and meticulous planning finally bearing fruit. Next to Harry, Daphne sat with her head leaned comfortably on his shoulder. The warmth of his body was a soothing presence against the lingering chill of the early morning. She shifted her neck occasionally, a slight, almost imperceptible movement, ensuring that no stiffness or ache would follow the relaxed position. The shared silence was a familiar, easy intimacy that had grown between them over the past several months, a quiet understanding that required few words. After a moment longer of simply enjoying the peace, Daphne raised her head just enough to whisper into his ear, her voice soft with concern. "Are you okay?" A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Harry, a sign of the focused tension he was trying to hide. He turned his head to meet her gaze, his emerald eyes deep and steady. "More than okay," Harry promised, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze before separating from her with a quiet, deliberate movement. The time for quiet was over. The time for action was approaching. "Something new is about to happen at breakfast today, though," Harry continued, his voice dropping to a serious, almost conspiratorial tone. He leaned closer, holding her gaze with his intense stare. "And I have to ask you to remain calm. I know you will see things that will surprise you, perhaps even frighten you, but you must keep your composure. Whatever you are about to witness is not going to hurt you, or anyone else that doesn't attack first. Understood? Your safety, and the safety of those around us, depends on all of us remaining calm." Daphne's pale, aristocratic features shifted in surprise, her eyes widening as she took in the gravity of his words. She knew Harry did not speak lightly, and the cryptic nature of his warning set a knot of apprehension in her stomach. Nevertheless, she was a greengrass, trained in composure, and she trusted him implicitly. She swallowed hard and nodded rapidly, a silent pledge to his instruction. In response to her affirmation, Harry's eyes began a swift, calculating sweep around the cavernous Great Hall. The room was steadily filling, the majority of the student body having arrived, a rising tide of chatter and the clatter of cutlery signaling the start of the daily routine. But Harry's attention was drawn to a different kind of arrival. His gaze sharpened, focusing on the massive oak doors at the entrance to the Great Hall. A lone, familiar man stood, and his red eyes met Harry's, offering a brief nod, before stepping behind the alcove to remain hidden for a moment longer. At the sight of Tom, a cold, hard resolve settled over Harry's features. Without hesitation, he drew his wand from his sleeve, a quick, practiced motion that went largely unnoticed in the bustling hall. His hand was steady, his grip firm. He brought the tip of the hollywood close to his lips and hissed softly, a low, guttural sound that carried a complex series of parcel-tongue commands. A moment later, a small, black-scaled creature, no thicker than his thumb and barely a foot long, uncoiled itself with astonishing speed from the tip of his wand. The creature, a highly venomous mamba, shook out of the wand, its intelligent, golden eyes locking onto Harry's for a fraction of a second, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between them. Then, with a speed that made it a mere dark blur, darted out of the room. It was gone, flowing over the stone floor and through the throng of legs without detection, clearly understanding the precise, urgent task Harry had assigned it, and it did so without question or pause. Offering a brief, reassuring nod in the direction of the imposing double doors of the Great Hall, Harry gently patted Daphne on the hand where it rested on his own, a silent promise of his return. He then rose smoothly to his feet, a simple action that nevertheless managed to draw the immediate, sharp attention of a significant number of the Slytherins clustered at the long table. He dismissed their sudden scrutiny, however, in favor of a more personal farewell, leaning slightly over his chair to press a light kiss to Daphne's cheek, a small, public gesture that was distinctly out of the ordinary for the reserved boy. He then executed a graceful step over his own now vacant chair, turning his focus to the lengthy aisle that separated the student tables from the raised platform of the staff. The buzz of conversation, which had been the low, steady thrum of the morning meal, instantly began to crackle with whispers all around the vast hall, a sudden storm of low, speculating voices. But Harry, seemingly impervious to the sudden shift in atmosphere he had caused, marched with a deliberate, unhurried pace towards the professor's table. His expression was carefully maintained, even, neutral, yet holding a clear, unwavering seriousness that broadcasted the gravitas of whatever mission was drawing him forward. As he neared his destination, the sight of him, a student interrupting the breakfast routine and approaching the staff, caused noticeable reactions. Professor McGonagall's lips tightened into a distinct frown, a gesture echoed by the concerned, bewildered expressions of many of her colleagues. Even the pink-clad, utterly loathsome figure of Professor Umbridge, the object of Harry's recent, powerful mental manipulations, offered a distinct, albeit manufactured, scowl from where she sat amidst the faculty. "Forgive me for interrupting everyone's breakfast, professors, but there is news that I think everyone in this room needs to hear," Harry said commandingly. The professors seemed to exchange nervous looks, as if they expected that their very worlds were about to be turned upside down. One by one, however, all eyes shifted to Professor McGonagall, who offered Harry a stern look. "What is it, Potter?" Harry cleared his throat, and then magically amplified his voice. "Last night, Professor Dumbledore and I went to the Ministry of Magic to retrieve an item that belonged to me. From there, we were ambushed by the Dark Lord." Many refused his words loudly, and even some of the professors looked horrified, while Professor McGonagall rose to her feet. "That is impossible, Potter. Where is the headmaster?" Without another word, Harry merely drew a long, pale wand from his robes, and held it firmly in his hand as its power thrummed in his hands. He knew there was something different about this wand, but he had not quite put his hand on it. Nonetheless, McGonagall recognized the wand, and all but collapsed into her chair with a heavy thud. The shouts began, and panic seemed to envelop the great hall, but with a slash of the pale wand in his hand, the hall fell into silence. The professors seemed outraged at this, several shooting to their feet. Professor Flitwick snapped, "Potter, undo your spell at once." "I would be careful where you point that wand, Phileas. That is my apprentice you are threatening," a new booming voice said from the entrance to the hall, and Harry turned his head to see the men that had been hidden by the door flood into the room. a dozen strong, and at the front was Tom himself. Gasps followed the man's declaration, and Harry offered a bow to the man and stepped aside as Tom strode his way between the benches. Many scurried away, some climbed over the table in hopes of putting distance between themselves and the red-eyed wizard that had arrived. Most of the staff had drawn their wands now, and some even dared to point them at Tom. "You are unwelcome here," Professor McGonagall hissed, finding the strength to rise back to her feet, clearly prepared to defend the students if necessary. "It is impossible to be unwelcome in something that inherently belongs to you, and make no mistake, Minerva McGonagall, Hogwarts is my birthright." Tom countered easily, before turning to address the students. "The world is a very different place than it was yesterday. Great change awaits us all, and it will start here at Hogwarts." A malevolent purple spell, clearly intended to incapacitate or perhaps even kill, shot through the air from Flitwick's wand, which was aimed squarely at the unsuspecting back of Lord Voldemort. Before it could make contact, however, a flash of crimson light erupted from the wand of Harry, who stood just a half-step behind his master. The shield met the incoming curse with a silent, invisible barrier, causing the hostile magic to dissipate harmlessly into nothingness. Tom didn't so much as flinch, let alone turn around. His focus remained entirely on the group of students before him. His lack of reaction was a profound display of his unshakable confidence in his young apprentice. His faith was a palpable thing, a silent testament to the devastating effectiveness Harry had proven to possess. Without shifting his gaze or altering the calm, measured tone that belied the immense power he held in check, the Dark Lord issued his command. "Harry," he said, his voice cutting through the tension-thick air like a silver wire. "I wish to show patience with these people whom I respect so much for their tenacity, misguided as it is. However," his red eyes flickered with a dangerous, cold calculation, "if another person dares to cast a spell at me, do not hesitate. Kill them." The statement was not a warning to Harry, but an unambiguous, chilling order delivered with the finality of a decree. It was a clear line drawn in the dust of the collapsing wizarding order. Moving to stand behind the man, Harry stared down his professors of the last 5 years, and Flitwick growled, "You are a gifted student, Potter, but this is madness. Get out of the way." "You only have a fraction of an idea of what I am capable of, Professor. It is I that killed Dumbledore, after all," Harry declared, causing gasps to fill the air. "Impossible," Flitwick whispered, and McGonagall placed a hand over chest as if she were having a great sudden pain. "For most, yes," Harry agreed, "but not for the apprentice of Lord Voldemort." Slughorn on the end looked like he might faint, but Harry held both wands in his hands now. The Holly and Phoenix wand he had grown up with, and the longer wand made of spirals he had taken from Dumbledore. Tom had insisted he keep it since he struck the final blow, and Harry was grateful to wield such a trophy, his very first in the act of conquest. Tom cleared his throat, and Harry said nothing further and just guarded the man back. He knew it was mostly for show, a symbol of trust. After all, he had a dozen of his most capable followers standing at the back of the hall. If this came to a fight, it would be bloody and fast. "It is true, Harry Potter is my apprentice. Harry Potter did kill Dumbledore," Tom admitted simply, seeming to relish in the shock of the student body. "He has been following my teachings for just 3 short years, and look how far he has come. He is the example that I wish for you all to follow, for he is proof that greatness can be achieved at any age. That is what I wish to carry over to Hogwarts." Tom began to pace in front of the scared students and spoke softly as his voice spread over the great hall. "You all have nothing to fear from Lord Voldemort. For as long as you do not stand against me, or my followers, you will be safe. Whether you be Muggle-born, half-blood, pure-blood, or blood traitor, it matters not to me. From this day forward," Tom continued, his voice resonating through the great hall, holding the attention of every student and professor, "you will be given a chance to learn and study magics that have long been forgotten, suppressed, or simply deemed too dangerous for the timid minds that previously controlled this institution. Hogwarts will no longer be a haven for mediocrity or a prison for ambition. If you harbor a natural penchant for a particular branch of the arcane arts, be it transfiguration, charms, or even the most misunderstood disciplines. It will not only be accepted, but actively nurtured, not discouraged. We will guide you with open minds and experienced hands through all forms of magic. May that be the pragmatic, raw power of the dark arts, the intricate, life-altering procedures of blood magic, or even the ancient, ritualistic magic that is capable of saving lives just as easily as it is of ending them. Tom paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. A significant hush had fallen over the hall, broken only by the faint crackle of the enchantment overhead. His gaze swept slowly over the student tables, finally settling with unnerving precision on the Slytherin ranks. "I know for a fact," he stated, his voice softening just enough to imply intimacy and profound knowledge, "that there is one among you today, right now, who would have faced a much shorter, more painful life had my apprentice and his allies not delved deeply and courageously into the complex, often maligned field of ritualistic magic to cure a blood curse that had haunted a family for generations." His eyes fell deliberately upon Astoria Greengrass, a young girl whose face flushed crimson under the sudden, public attention. He had undoubtedly recognized her from the deep well of Harry's recent, vivid memories that contained both his compassion and his ruthless efficiency. But he offered no further comment on the topic, simply a subtle, knowing nod. "Behind me stand some of the most gifted, though perhaps conventionally minded, instructors in the magical world," Tom continued, gesturing vaguely towards the petrified staff. "But they are limited. Limited, I am afraid, in their practical knowledge of the forbidden or newly rediscovered arts necessary for true magical progress. It is for this reason that I have taken it upon myself to begin restructuring the faculty. I have appointed a new headmaster, a visionary, and assigned additional staffing, composed of practitioners from disciplines previously unpracticed within these walls, who will help guide each of you in your magical journeys that will begin in earnest next year. Their goal will be to elevate you beyond mere academic compliance and into genuine mastery." A tension was building, palpable and brittle in the air. Tom's expression, however, remained serene, almost paternal. "I will soon turn you over to your next headmaster, who will outline the future. But before I do, I wish to leave you all with this simple, guiding principle: work hard. Prove yourselves worthy of the opportunity you have been given. Be the cunning and the ambitious in your endeavors, the loyal and the fair in your alliances, the brave and the steadfast in the face of fear, and above all, the intelligent and the determined in your pursuit of knowledge. Do all of this, and you may just attract the attention of those who possess the power and wisdom to make you truly great, just like Harry himself did all those years ago." He took a breath, a final flourish before the introduction. "Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce to you the new Hogwarts headmaster." "No," Minerva McGonagall's roar of protest shattered the moment of hushed anticipation. Her voice, fueled by righteous fury and desperation, cut through the quiet like a whip. Surging forward, she wrenched her wand free, her intent clear, to stop the man whatever the cost. "Diffudio!" she bellowed, the word a battle cry as a jet of crimson light erupted from her wand tip, rocketing toward Tom's chest. But before the legendary transfiguration witch could hit her mark, or even utter a second syllable, a silent, invisible force slammed into her. She was hoisted violently into the air, as if seized by an immense, unseen fist. The magical shockwave tore her half-finished spell completely apart, the crimson light dissipating into harmless sparks. Choking, her feet dangling uselessly 10 feet above the floor, Minerva clawed desperately at her throat, her face turning a dangerous purple as the crushing, magical constriction around her neck tightened. The other professors roared their disapproval, but it was all silenced by the deafening hiss of a new arrival. At the other end of the hall, curling up just outside the entrance doors, was the basilisk. Harry saw the terrified screams on the faces of the silenced students, and he was grateful they had all been placed under the spell, as they scattered to the walls. Tom hissed loudly, and Harry recognized the man commanding his ancestors' familiar. "Relax, Great One, I can handle this. Thank you for coming, old friend." The sound of the snake language seemed to frighten the students into submission, and even the professors had lowered their wands, clearly understanding that if a fight erupted, the mythically powerful beast would enter the fray against them, and students would undoubtedly die in the crossfires. It was strictly an intimidation factor, however, because the basilisk would not be needed to defeat the professors. Harry knew that Tom did not want blood shed at Hogwarts today, though, and had hoped that the transition of power would be peaceful. There will be no other warnings. Minerva McGonagall, out of the respect I once held for you, I will spare your life. Expect no such mercies a second time, Tom said coldly as he released the woman, forcing her to cough violently in relief. Tom shrugged his shoulders and held his hands in the air. There is no need to panic. My familiar is here to keep you safe, just as my ancestor, Salazar Slytherin, intended. Her gaze is only deadly to those she wishes to harm, and she will not harm any student that does not first attack her. You have my word. Please retake your seats. It took a few minutes, but the students seemed to realize they had no choice as they slowly moved back to their tables, and Tom just offered a pleasant smile to them all. When the seats had been reclaimed, Tom spoke again. As I was saying before, I would like to introduce you all to your newest headmaster, a former unspeakable, and perhaps my most brilliant follower, Augustus Rookwood. Thankfully, the Slytherins were quick on the uptake and applauded the man's arrival. Harry was grateful the other houses were completely stupid, as many of the students offered less than enthusiastic applause, but applause nonetheless. Augustus marched down the hall, removing his Death Eater mask and flipping down his hood, showing a clean-shaved man with curly hair. Harry believed the man to be in his early 40s, but wasn't exactly sure, but offered a slight bow of his head as he slid out of the way, and Tom moved to stand beside him as the former unspeakable began addressing the students. I know this is frightening for many of you. Change always is. The man continued to give a speech trying to assure the students of their safety and the coming progress that would follow next year, and Tom turned to Harry whispering softly, I think that went well. Harry fought back the snort that threatened to escape him. No one has died yet, so I suppose that is a victory. We will send the students home today, Tom advised. Speak with the staff and make what is coming crystal clear. Any that wish to not return will be granted their leave peacefully. For the first time, Harry was certain they were doing the right thing. In all the violence that would surely follow, keeping it out of Hogwarts would be for the best. If they really wanted to sway people's loyalty, changing the minds of his generation would be the best place to start. We've done it, Harry whispered. There is still much to be done, Tom promised, but said nothing further as Rookwood concluded his speech and applauded along with the students. With the basilisk moving out onto the grounds, Rookwood dismissed the students to their dorms, informing them they would all be going home for the time being, while 5th and 7th year students would return on their own to the castle in the coming weeks to take their exams. He encouraged them to study hard and prepare, but assured them a few days of revision would be allowed at Hogwarts before they were expected to take the test. This was merely a chance for the country to acclimate to what was coming. In the end, the students piled out. Most of the Slytherins now looked at Harry as if he were the next coming of Merlin, while a few eyed him in fear. They knew in some way or another many of them had wronged Harry over the years, but after everything that had gone on, Harry was not looking for revenge, just a way forward. His eyes fell on Daphne, who looked like she desperately wanted to come to his side, but instead, he just offered her an assuring nod and a slight jerk of his head indicating that she would need to return to the common room for now, and reluctantly she complied. When just the Death Eaters and the professors were left, Tom addressed them. I understand this is difficult for many of you. I understand that Dumbledore was a friend to most of you, but a new era has begun, and it does not have to be as horrific as I am sure you have painted it in your minds. Next to Tom stood Augustus, who agreed immediately. We do not wish for violence here at Hogwarts. Any that do not wish to return next term will be allowed amnesty to depart. No repercussions. But if you do return, Tom continued firmly, you must understand that there will be changes. Your fundamental subjects can remain the same. All will be invited to return, and your lessons will not interfered with, merely expanded by other subjects. And who will fund this? Pomona Sprout demanded. New staff, more subjects, how will we accommodate? Do not worry about the finances, Tom assured the long table, his voice carrying a rich, resonant timbre that commanded immediate attention. They are the absolute least of everyone's worries now. In fact, those who choose to return to us, who embrace the new world we are forging, will not merely be forgiven, but will be rewarded handsomely. We are prepared to offer substantial incentives to bring everyone back into the fold with open arms. We wish to bring everyone back in good faith, not through coercion, but through compelling example. Allow us to show you all, not just with empty words but with tangible, undeniable evidence, that the future does not have to be an endless cycle of death, fear, and violence among each other. I assure you all now, with absolute certainty, we have already won. A cold, heavy truth seemed to settle over the long mahogany table, replacing the hushed murmurs with an unnerving silence. Tom's gaze swept across the faces of those gathered, a look of profound, calculated triumph in his eyes. He tightened his grip on Harry's shoulders, a proprietary, intimate gesture. I have converted even the one destined by prophecy and fate to oppose me, the one you know as the boy who lived. His power, his name, his very destiny now serve our cause. I have also strategically removed the most powerful, the most influential, and the most determined figures who could have truly combated my authority, those who would have stood as genuine threats to the New World Order. Any remaining resistance now, regardless of its size or fervor, would be utterly futile, an act of sheer, self-destructive madness. And while let it be known that we will not provoke further violence, having already secured our victory in Britain, we will not hesitate for a single second to crush, utterly and decisively, any feeble flame of defiance that arises. And you will not judge certain populations of the castle just because of their circumstance of birth or family, Professor Babbling, a Muggle-born professor, asked. I meant what I said, Tom promised. Despite those I champion, I care not for the pureblood politics. I only wish to find the most gifted and show them a better way. I will not deny the fact that pureblood students will have an upper hand, because it is true, if a Muggle-born and a pureblood student are of the same magical level, then the student with a foothold in the magical world will likely prosper more. But I hope this merely encourages all students to be the very best they can be. Scoffing, Umbridge down the table, eyes widened as she realized she had just made the sound aloud. And Tom's eyes flicked towards the woman. Dolores, I had forgotten you were here. Given what my apprentice tells me, I am afraid you will be the sole member of staff not invited back next year. I may have other uses for you, but not here at Hogwarts. I am afraid my vision for you lies elsewhere. Like another side of the world, Harry thought petulantly. Umbridge, however, bowed her head in fear and said nothing further. Augustus then readdressed the gathered professors. My only request is that you all remain on a little past the end of term. Allow the 5th and 7th year students to finish with the professors they are used to. When the new term begins on September 1st, we can implement the changes we are imagining. Changes we will keep you all up to date with if you decide to return. Will that creature be roaming the castle freely? Flitwick asked in a cold voice. Tom smiled freely at the question. Sesha is a very loyal beast. She has been within the school for nearly 1,000 years. She will be the guardian of our fine institute. After all, not all will take the changes to our world so happily. We must continue to boost the defenses of the castle, and Sesha will of course be willing and able to fight any invading force. You will not need to worry about her food either. There is enough in the Forbidden Forest to make her very happy. You also have my assurance that she will not harm any student. Salazar Slytherin had intended for Sesha to be used in this capacity, but the other founders were not comfortable with the idea. As his descendant, I am thrilled to see this vision come to fruition. The words clearly indicated the removal of the beast would not be an option, and the other professors were smart enough to catch onto this. Now, Tom said with a clap of his hands, I know this has been a shocking morning. Go get some rest, think about my offer, and let Augustus know as you decide whether you will be returning or not. Offering a slight bow of his head and a flourish of his hand, Tom began retreating out of the great hall, with Harry right on his heels. Potter, McGonagall asked, causing the teen to stop and look at the woman. Are you not staying? Before Harry could answer, Tom put a hand on his shoulder. "I assure you, my apprentice is far beyond the Hogwarts curriculum, and now that everything is in place, I have far more important uses for him. Rest assured, I will look after him like he is my own, as I have for the last 3 years." This seemed to make Professor McGonagall sick with thought, but Harry's heart swelled at Tom's declaration and followed the man towards the grounds as the Death Eaters fell in behind him. Glancing over his shoulder, Harry knew he would return to Hogwarts many times over the coming days, but doubted he would ever do so as a student again. Chapter 88. Today marks a step forward for the wizarding world. Not just here in Britain, but anywhere and everywhere that young children grow up with a wand in their hand, and even for those who are given one at the tender age of 11 when they discover who they are. Tom said, his voice resonating triumphantly as the dazzling camera, lights flashed, and cycled through the Wizengamot chamber. The light show was a spectacle that seemed to underscore the gravity of the occasion. Each member of the Wizengamot seemed to be sitting at the edge of their seats, but the reasons vastly contrasted with one another. For some, the anticipation was a heady rush of excitement, a shared sense of victory, and a deep-seated belief that they had won a great victory. These were the Loyalists, the Death Eaters, and their descendants who saw Tom as a champion for what they believed in. The notion that Tom, or Lord Voldemort as he was now known, was the champion of pureblood supremacy was a belief as naive as it was dangerous. Harry understood with certainty that the Dark Lord's motivations were far simpler and infinitely more important than mere blood prejudice. Tom only cared for power, the relentless and absolute accumulation of might, and his followers were deluding themselves if they believed otherwise. It mattered not to the Dark Lord whether a witch or wizard was Muggle-born, pureblood, or even an entity from beyond their world. If they possessed power that could be exploited, or if their annihilation served his larger purpose, he would use or destroy them without a flicker of conscience. The purebloods who had flocked to his banner, chanting the tired mantra of greater good for their lineage, were marching toward a rude and brutal awakening. They imagined a hierarchy where they sat at the top, ruling over the lesser elements of society. What they failed to grasp was that in Tom's perfect world, the only true hierarchy was power itself. Their noble blood and ancient names meant nothing next to the raw magical strength of a rival, or even the strategically useful mind of someone they currently deemed an inferior. His true, unvarnished philosophy was a chilling simplicity. Magic was might. That was the single, universal truth he sought to enforce. Every person, every creature, and every aspect of society would soon be rigorously categorized and measured by this brutal metric. The old traditions, the reverence for lineage, and the pomp of pureblood culture were merely tools to gather and motivate his initial legions. Once he had what he wanted, absolute control, those same followers would find themselves judged by his new, ruthless standard. The country, the entire magical world, would be reshaped into this singular, draconian belief system where only the strong survived, and the strongest would reign supreme. As Harry's eyes shifted from those he knew had thrown their hats in with Tom to those who would stand against him, he knew the mood was one of profound dread. Their postures were rigid, their hands clenched, and their minds raced with frantic calculations. They were bred by a different generation where all could be equal, the staunch progressives, and those who had everything to lose under the new regime. In their minds, thoughts of fleeing vied with the paralyzing fear of direct confrontation. They were cornered, watching their world irrevocably shift beneath the weight of Tom's ascendancy, and there was nothing they could do but watch in horror. Silent and utterly formidable, Harry stood just behind Tom. He was a sentinel carved from shadowed robes and a gold mask, a constant, chilling reminder of the raw power backing his mentor. His presence alone was an unnerving spectacle. To the world, he was introduced as the apprentice of Lord Voldemort, the living embodiment of the new era's ruthless capability, and his silent vigilance behind Tom was a chilling punctuation mark on the momentous occasion. "Today marks a day that our children will speak of," Tom said passionately, his gaze sweeping over the masses that filled the grand, echoing chamber of the Wizengamot. The crowd was a tapestry of emotion, triumph and terror, rage and relief, all woven together in a single, volatile assembly. And our grandchildren and their grandchildren. We stand among history as it is being made, and we should rejoice in what is to come. A nervous ripple of murmurs followed Tom's words, a low, hesitant thrum of voices that bounced off the marble pillars. He didn't allow this apprehension to deter him. In fact, he welcomed the tension, letting it hang in the air like the scent of ozone before a storm. He did nothing to silence them, except to continue speaking, his voice, magically amplified, cutting through the low-level chatter with effortless authority. "What is to come?" he repeated, the question hanging heavy in the expectant silence he had once again commanded. "That must be a question in the minds of all of you this morning. By now you all know that here, in the very heart of this ministry, Albus Dumbledore fell to the wand of my apprentice." The reaction was immediate and polarized. A roar of triumphant cheers erupted from the section of the Wisengamot and the hall that was populated by his most loyal followers and the soon-to-be appointed officials of his regime. Fist-pumping, ecstatic shouts of the Dark Lord and freedom echoed deafeningly. Yet, on the opposite side, where the remaining members of the former ruling body and those still clinging to the old order sat, faces were contorted with white-hot rage and unconcealed terror. Gasps of horror mixed with furious, inarticulate cries of protest. They had come to the ministry hopping for a rebuttal, a rescue, a sign that the rumors were false. Tom had just crushed that hope completely. Tom didn't let the emotion fester for long. He raised his hands, a simple, almost casual gesture that nonetheless demanded and received immediate quiet. The noise died down as if a silencing charm had been cast upon the chamber. He waited until every eye was fixed on him, a magnetic gaze sweeping over the crowd. Before he resumed speaking, his tone now shifting from passionate to statesmanlike, almost reflective. "I know what he meant to our world, to our country, to our people," Tom stated, the gravity of the admission sinking deep into the silent crowd. "He was once my own teacher, a man I respected even if I did disagree with him. The loss of such a monumental figure is a tragedy, but it is a necessary tragedy." He paused, letting the weight of the word necessary settle. For too long, Dumbledore wanted to protect the world, but he didn't want it to change. To this, I ask, how is humanity saved if it is not allowed to evolve? Tom allowed the question to sit with the audience, and even was raptured by the man's words, when he continued, "Our world was bound by the chains of a stagnant ideology, led by a man who mistook sentimentality for strength. Dumbledore's era of soft control and fear-mongering is over. The death of one man has paved the way for the true rebirth of our magical society." Shocked silence continued over the Wisengamot, but the press seemed to scribble every word down with near desperation. The shock of the ancient families seemed to vary from outrage to glee, but that hardly mattered to Tom. In fact, Harry could tell the man relished it. The old ways will serve us no longer. Our society has long craved something new, something different. For too long, we have hidden in the shadows, hidden from the Muggles because they are afraid of our gifts. Because we are different, and the Muggles have always feared that which is different. And now I propose to you, each of you, a fundamental fact: magic blooms only in rare souls. It is granted to those who have the divine right to rule, and here we stand on the precipice of that right, and we shall bow down no longer. For many generations, Tom said, cutting through the whispers, we have kept silent, kept hidden, lived in fear that our exposure would bring about a great calamity, a calamity we might lose. And to that I say, I am unwilling to wait for our inevitable doom. I am unwilling to forfeit our lives, our children's lives, to those lesser than us of magical blood. Not today and not tomorrow, but someday in our lifetime, we must take control of our world. It is not something that can be rushed or hurried, yet we must begin taking steps, and here we are taking the first one together as a society. Hushed, shocked silence fell over the Wisengamot, and Tom embraced the moment. And we can't be alone in this decision. We must recruit like-minded allies from all corners of the globe. We must assemble allies and prepare to strike down any that might stand against us, for this is not a war we will win overnight. This is not a war we can win with a single spell or a singularly powerful wizard. We must band together and take back a world that is rightfully ours. And I have already taken the first steps. Tom nodded casually in a direction Harry struggled to recognize. but soon his eyes became alight with a cold, triumphant satisfaction, and he noticed the arrival of their new company. Two imposing figures, Death Eaters, Harry immediately recognized as Rodolphus Lestrange and Corbin Yaxley, were manhandling a prisoner. The man they dragged in was clearly Muggle, dressed in a traditional, though slightly rumpled, pinstripe suit, a hallmark of the London financial or political elite. A black bowler hat, now slightly askew, sat on his head. He was a distinguished, if terrified, individual, with a shock of gray hair peeking out from under the hat, and a long, neatly trimmed mustache framing a face that spoke of years spent in the rarefied air of the upper-class Muggle world. His eyes, though wide with fear, still held a faint trace of the authority he was accustomed to wielding. Without an ounce of haste, Tom introduced their captive with a chilling lack of ceremony, his voice carrying the smooth, resonant quality of a man used to commanding absolute attention. "This," he announced, gesturing toward the struggling figure with an almost patronizing flick of his wrist, "is the Muggle Prime Minister." A momentary, significant silence followed this revelation, allowing the weight of the statement to settle over the group. Tom then proceeded, weaving a tale of established power dynamics and effortless manipulation. "It has long been a quiet, unspoken tradition that the leader of our world and the leader of the Muggle world maintain a close, if discreet, contact. This arrangement, established through the necessity of the International Statute of Secrecy, serves a crucial purpose: to help solve issues that straddle the divide, and to ensure that each leader is made aware of any current events that might impact both societies." A thin, cruel smile played on Tom's lips as he concluded, his eyes gleaming with the absolute confidence of a man who held all the cards. "And I found," he added, his voice dropping slightly, "that it was all too easy to bend this man, this supposed pinnacle of Muggle leadership, to my will. A few choice memories altered, a subtle threat to the fragile peace his world cherishes, and he became a pliable instrument." The Muggle Prime Minister slumped slightly in the Death Eater's grip, a man utterly defeated, a stark symbol of the magical world's hidden dominance. "That is the power we hold," Tom declared, his voice ringing with absolute, unshakable conviction, echoing off the polished stone walls of the cavernous room where his followers and prospective recruits stood assembled. "A power that is not merely academic or historical, but vital. A power our society holds, not just by the elite, but by even the weakest among us. Every single magical individual, regardless of their current standing or skill, is intrinsically capable of this. Capable of being better, demonstrably and fundamentally superior to our Muggle counterparts." He paused, letting the weight of his statement settle, his eyes sweeping over the expectant faces. His expression hardened slightly, moving from collective superiority to focused ambition. "Now, while I maintain that all magicals by their very nature hold a purpose, a function within the tapestry of our superior world, what I, Lord Voldemort, am searching for now is far more refined. I seek those who possess the raw, unyielding drive, the profound, untapped potential, and most critically, the burning, insatiable desire to be truly great, to achieve what others only dream of. To seize power and help shape the future of this world in our image." He dismissed the old prejudices with a contemptuous wave of his hand. "Your blood status means little to me. It is a historical footnote, a mere starting point. Your personal history, your failures, your successes, they are all irrelevant baggage that I will not concern myself with. The only thing I, Lord Voldemort, the leader who will restore this world to its rightful glory, care about is this: what you can do for me, and by extension, what you can do for our society." His voice dropped, becoming a low, potent promise. "Do not come before me with excuses or with inherited titles. Come with competence. Come with ruthless ambition. Show me your absolute best. Lay your greatest talents, your most dangerous cunning, and your deepest loyalty at my feet. Prove your worth in action, not in words. And for those I deem worthy, for those who truly commit to my vision and display the inherent greatness I demand, I will give you more than mere recognition or a place in my inner circle. I will give you the world in return. Absolute power, absolute glory, and a future where our kind rules supreme, forever free of the Muggle interference. The world is ours for the taking. Prove you deserve it." Cheers erupted from around the room, a cacophony of shouts, applause, and the pounding of fists on tables. Harry watched, the knot loosening in his stomach, as Tom's declaration seemed to galvanize some of his doubters. The sheer wave of enthusiasm, far exceeding the tentative support Harry had initially anticipated, was a chilling testament to Tom's persuasive power. His words, laced with promises of a glorious, new era, had struck a deep chord with these people from all walks of wizarding life. But the din was cut short instantly. Tom, with a simple, masterful raise of both hands, hushed the entire room. The sudden silence was more commanding than any shout. He surveyed his people, a look of focused intensity on his face, and concluded his speech with final, resolute words of declaration that cemented his mission. Our victory, let me be clear, cannot be won overnight. It is a war of attrition, a campaign that demands patience, cunning, and absolute resolve. First, we must focus on widening our cause. We must convince the rest of our brethren, our true kin, to join us. They must see the undeniable logic in our vision, the sheer power in our unity. But if they prove reluctant, if they choose to cling to the shadows of the past or oppose our necessary dawn, then we will not hesitate. We will make them see our way of things. Complacency will be met with conviction. Neutrality will be seen as opposition. My apprentice, he gestured subtly towards Harry, a silent acknowledgement of their partnership, and I are prepared to lead from the front. We are prepared to pave our way in blood to victory, because the tomorrow we are building is brighter, more powerful, and more glorious than any other we have ever dreamed of. It is a destiny worthy of true magic. We must simply be brave enough to pursue it, to seize it with every fiber of our being. The applause surged from every corner of the vast hall, a torrent of sound that washed over Harry. It was a clear, unambiguous swell of approval, a potent declaration of support that cut through the lingering tension in the air. It was clear to Harry that some followed Tom out of fear, and while this was predictable, Harry couldn't help but target a few of each of them in the back of his mind. Also among the predictable few that would resist were the staunch progressives, the cynics, and the deeply entrenched opponents that believed in equality, abstained, remaining silent in their habitual resistance. The sheer volume of those who clapped versus those who didn't was overwhelming. This was more than just a show of hands. This applause felt like a commitment. Many in the room, particularly the influential members and those with significant power, seemed to be actively preparing to align themselves with Tom's burgeoning movement, recognizing the inevitable shift in the political landscape with power they could hardly even imagine. They were calculating the future and seeing their own best interests intertwined with his rise. Crucially, this wave of initial support was poised to be amplified tenfold, with the majority of Hogwarts' student body also quietly, and soon, openly, falling in behind him. Their combined numbers would create a critical mass in the years to come. This coalition of established figures and the next generation of influential witches and wizards was shaping up to be an unstoppable force, a power base significant enough to challenge and ultimately redefine the existing order of the wizarding world. Harry was grateful Tom had already decided to ensure the compliance of Hogwarts, but still, he looked back on the moment with trepidation and hoped that many would not be lost along the way to victory. Oh. In the dimly lit, opulent setting of the minister's office, Harry stood, no longer concealed by the facade of his golden mask. His wand was held loosely behind in his right hand, a silent sentinel to his master's protection. In front of him, Tom wore silver and black robes and was seated in the big throne-like chair, his posture one of a coiled snake, hands folded neatly in his lap. Across the sprawling, dark mahogany desk from them, 3 figures of consequence were arrayed. Augustus Rookwood, his scarred, grizzled visage a roadmap of past conflicts. Then there was Corbin Yaxley, impeccably dressed and radiating a chilling, aristocratic calm, and Bellatrix Lestrange, her dark eyes glittering with manic excitement, a coiled spring of dangerous loyalty. Tom exuded an effortless authority, his voice smooth as silk as he leaned back comfortably in the plush, high-backed ministerial chair. "Augustus," he began, his gaze piercing, "how have things been at Hogwarts? I trust the students and staff departed peacefully for their temporary holiday." Augustus appeared unusually relaxed as he fell under the observation of Tom and Harry. He wore the heavy, dark cloaks with the Hogwarts insignia on them, and a look of deep satisfaction, more pronounced than Harry had ever witnessed on the former Unspeakable's face, settled upon him. "Smoothly enough, my lord," Rookwood replied, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "The mass departure was without incident, thanks to the efficiency of the newly appointed prefects and a few well-placed patrols." He paused, a flicker of amusement playing on his lips. There were some grumbles from the professors, a few of the older, more sentimental ones. They seemed to be skeptical of the coming changes. "And of course," Rookwood chuckled, a dry, harsh sound, "we had the usual open words of rebellion from the Gryffindors." His satisfaction was evident. "We will, naturally, weed them out next term if they become a nuisance. A few strategic disappearances or reassignments to less desirable places should suffice to curb their enthusiasm." "I would like to keep that as minimal as possible," Tom demanded. "Let the punishments of the world take place in the ministry and in the eyes of the public. Teach our society that there are consequences to their actions. Punish them, but let us not take drastic actions at Hogwarts. Instead, we will have Yaxley and the Department of Magical Law Enforcement take out our displeasure on their families." Augustus nodded his assent and said nothing further. Tom then turned his attention to Bella. "I trust you were successful in your assignment." Bella looked gleeful as she rose gracefully from her seat, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. The victory she just secured, or more accurately, the object she now possessed, clearly pleased her. She glided towards the Darkwood desk, the movement intentionally provocative, and leaned forward. The deep V-neck of her dark robes plunged, offering Tom a clear, distracting view of her ample bosom. It was a calculated display, designed to reinforce her success and earn a flicker of appreciation from the one man she truly desired to please. In her outstretched hand, she held a wand aloft. It was a sleek, pale wood, entirely unfamiliar to Harry. The artifact felt delicate but potent, humming with a lingering, faint trace of its previous owner's magic. A magic that Harry discerned was now violently extinguished. "She was as talented as you believed, my lord," Bella purred, her voice husky with triumph, her dark eyes glittering with devotion. The implication was clear. The victim had been formidable, worthy of Tom's assessment, but ultimately futile against his direct influence. "But no match for your teachings. Her strength was merely a testament to the superiority of the power you bestowed upon me." She presented the unfamiliar wand to him like a trophy, a severed head on a silver platter, basking in the reflected glow of his eventual approval. The air in the study felt thick with the residue of dark magic and Bella's volatile excitement, a tangible confirmation of a life recently ended and a power brutally annexed. Tom took the wand with a pleased look on his face as he turned it in his fingers, before handing it back to his apprentice. "Harry, you have met the owners of this wand before. Can you tell me who it belonged to?" As Harry took the wand and began studying it, Bella looked disgruntled, but only for a moment when Tom offered her a charming smile. "You have done very well, Bella, defeating a witch of." "Amelia Bones," Harry said softly. "That is quite the accomplishment, Bella." "Outstanding, Harry," Tom said, pleased, and looked at Augustus. He couldn't have met the witch more than a few times, but he was able to discern the witch's magic. "Prodigious, my lord," Augustus admitted, looking suitably impressed. Yaxley looked relieved when he said, "With Bones out of the way, that only leaves Shacklebolt in the Auror department, who is worth anything. He will be a problem, my lord." "Attachments?" Tom asked simply. "None that we know of," Yaxley admitted. "I'll do some digging," Harry promised from behind, causing all eyes in the room to fall on him. Harry flushed slightly, but continued, "I have a few connections I can explore. I believe Kingsley Shacklebolt was a member of the Order of the Phoenix. If he has anything he cares about here, we can find it and break him down. Get him to see our way, it might keep the more stubborn Aurors in line." "See it done then," Tom said, clearly pleased by his apprentice's utilization of resources. Harry offered a slight bow before Tom resumed the conversation. "Bella, I would like you to go to France with your sister, Narcissa. The Malfoy name still commands respect in that arena. Get young Draco on our side. In 2 short years, he will be valuable to us as Lord Malfoy and in many circles on the continent. If we can't control him, I will have my apprentice bend him to our will." "France, my lord," Bella asked quietly, "won't I be of more use to you here?" Tom frowned at the question. "We have eliminated nearly every powerhouse left in the country. Excluding our group, the most powerful magic users left in Britain are likely this Kinglesey Shacklebolt and some of the Hogwarts professors who are well beyond their prime. Our biggest threats are now those on the continent. A continent I intend to invade once we settle things here." Yaxley, clearly sensing the tension, decided to de-escalate before Bella could foolishly retort. "The werewolves and giants have moved into the outskirts of Paris. Rodolphus also reports that negotiations are going well with the vampires. They are most impressed by your defeat of Dumbledore." Clearly willing to let the outspoken witch have a pass for her momentary outburst, a courtesy he rarely extended, Tom clapped his hands together with a sharp, decisive sound that echoed slightly in the otherwise quiet chamber. "Excellent," he announced, his voice smooth and authoritative, yet underscored with a chilling finality. He gestured casually toward a large, antique map of Europe on a nearby wall, his eyes lingering on the region of France. "That means Bella will be close to our army of magical creatures in case we need aggressive negotiations." He paused, a predatory smile playing on his lips. "If, however, our diplomatic negotiations with the current French minister's delegation reach an impasse, if they prove stubbornly resistant to seeing the wisdom in our proposed unified magical policy for Europe, then I will not hesitate to deploy our contingency plan. I will immediately dispatch Harry into the theater of operations to assist Bella." Tom's eyes, bright and utterly devoid of warmth, swept across his inner circle. Harry's skill set, coupled with Bella's ruthlessness, will constitute a formidable force. They will coordinate their efforts to ensure that the current administration is destabilized and removed from power. We will, by whatever means necessary, ensure that the next Minister of Magic for France is not merely sympathetic, but entirely amenable to our view of things. A pause followed this before Tom nodded his head in satisfaction. "I think that will do for today. You all have your orders and assignments. You have all done well." The 3 across the desk stood up and offered a short bow, before one by one they began exiting the room. With Tom and Harry being the final 2 occupants in the room, Harry moved to the other side of the desk and took a seat as Tom's eyes were now cast down to some paperwork on his desk, before the man scoffed. "I never wanted to be minister. This needs to be a short transition of power before I grant it to a figurehead. I am not cut out for paperwork." "Not," Harry said with little thought. "He has been loyal, and his son is a very promising wizard. They would be a good family for you to reward since the Malfoys have fallen from your grace." Tom hardly even glanced up but nodded his head. "An excellent idea. Wise counsel, my apprentice." No other words were said for a moment. A comfortable silence fell between the two as Harry watched the man piece together the ministerial paperwork. After some time, Harry rose to his feet. "I am going to try to catch Augustus. I had some questions about Dumbledore's wand, and I know he has some knowledge on wand lore." "Something wrong with it?" Tom asked, not even looking up. "Not at all," Harry said, moving towards the door. "It's powerful. A good match, maybe even better than my original wand. I will definitely work on wielding them at the same time. I saw some books in the Black family library about the style of dueling with 2 wands. It seemed interesting." Tom said nothing else and turned the page to the paperwork he was looking at, and Harry made his way to the door. A lot had happened over the last few days, and the two had little time to speak, but Harry felt like he needed to get something off his chest. "Tom." It wasn't often Harry addressed the man by his name any longer. Over the years, the casual intimacy of a first name had been replaced by a more formal title, an observation of respect and deference to his position as master. It was a deliberate choice, a constant reminder of the hierarchy they inhabited and the debt Harry owed. The simple address, just the man's name, felt almost jarring, a momentary lapse in the discipline Harry had worked so hard to cultivate. But what rested on the teen's mind now was something personal, a weight that pressed down on him since the duel with Dumbledore. It was a subject that required the vulnerability of equals, or at least the illusion of it. Harry needed to bridge that small, conversational gap to even begin to voice his thoughts. The young mentor, who possessed an unnerving ability to read Harry's subtle shifts in mood, picked up on it immediately. The change in demeanor, the slight tension in Harry's shoulders, the way his gaze wasn't quite meeting the man's eyes, it all registered. The mentor paused in whatever ministerial work had occupied his attention, his hands resting on the smooth wood of his desk, and looked up. He observed Harry wordlessly, his expression a careful mixture of patient inquiry and unwavering attention, waiting for Harry to take the next, more difficult step of articulation. The silence stretched, neither demanding nor pressuring, simply holding space for the weight of Harry's unspoken thought. "The night of my first ritual," Harry began softly, questioning in his voice. "The night you severed the Horcrux inhabiting me, it destroyed that piece of your soul, didn't it? You weren't able to reabsorb it like the others." Tom considered his apprentice for a long moment before he whispered the word. "No, the ritual was magic even I dared not to push against. Once it had its target, there were very few options, and only one of which you would have survived." Harry felt something tighten in his throat, and a long moment passed before he choked out, "Thank you, Tom, that sacrifice. I can't tell you how much it means to me." "You've never let me down, Harry," Tom said softly. "You have accomplished the tasks I have set out for you in ways I would not have imagined, but you always accomplished them. You have never made me regret my decision." The teen wanted to say more, but Harry knew he was at the very edge of what Tom might call sentimental. Instead of saying anything further, Harry offered the man a low bow. "Well, it seems our journey is only just beginning. No more hiding, no more secrets, no more horror." Before Harry could finish his phrase, a hissing entered the room, and Harry interpreted the word, "Master." At first, Harry expected Sesha to somehow appear, but instead at his feet slithering between him, Harry felt a malignant bit of magic pass him, and he was surprised to see a massive python pass him by without concern. Harry nearly jumped at the sight of the creature, and was surprised when he felt a massive bit of dark magic coming from the snake. Harry's eyes widened, and Tom hissed at the creature, "Welcome, Nagini. There will be plenty of opportunities for food around the ministry, and I trust you will be able to keep a close eye on things from the SS shadows. If you need any help, you can always seek out my kin." Harry's eyes felt like saucers, but he didn't comment on what he knew must be true. Instead, he hissed to the snake in greeting, "Hello, Nagini." "Young master," the snake said in return, but nothing else. "You'd better get going, Harry," Tom said with chilling satisfaction, a smile playing on his lips. "You will need to if you are going to catch up with Augustus." Harry swallowed heavily and nodded, offering a final bow before exiting the room, feeling a slight discomfort, but also certainty that Tom was still immortal. Chapter 84. Agonizing. That was the only word Harry could use to describe the month that had passed since returning to school. A suffocating blend of intense magical training and profound personal isolation had defined his days. Dumbledore had become a ghost in his own castle, much to Harry's annoyance. The old man wasn't merely busy, he was actively, deliberately avoiding Harry at every turn, a silence that felt heavier than any confrontation. Despite that month of calculated avoidance and underlying tension, Harry had not been idle. The forced distance from Dumbledore had simply refocused his energy and determination. He had taken the clandestine defense lessons he ran in the Slytherin common room up a significant notch. The lessons were no longer introductory skirmishes. They were rigorous, high-stakes training sessions designed to forge his potential followers into a true fighting force. Harry wasn't just teaching, he was pushing the limits of his own prodigious knowledge of the dark arts. His favorite challenge, the one that made his blood sing with exhilarating effort, was dueling. He would face 3, 4, sometimes even 5 students simultaneously. In order to make the feat truly extraordinary, he imposed a strict, self-enforced limitation. He couldn't cast a single offensive spell. It was a masterclass in non-verbal, non-wand-based defense and magical theory put into brutal practice. He relied entirely on his instinct, a serpentine grace in movement, complex shield work, strategic misdirection, and the subtle, nearly invisible manipulation of ambient magic. He would weave a tapestry of defensive spells, deflecting hexes with a flick of his wrist, sidestepping jinxes with balletic precision, and turning his opponent's own momentum against them. The challenge wasn't just physical, but a fierce mental exercise in predicting multiple attack vectors and neutralizing them all at once. This relentless regime served two crucial purposes. First, it genuinely elevated the skill level of his fellow Slytherins, instilling in them a deep respect for his mastery that transcended mere house politics. They watched, awestruck, as he danced through a storm of spells, untouchable and utterly dominant, wowing his fellow students into a kind of stunned, reverent submission. They weren't just following him out of convenience, they were choosing to follow the undeniable power and genius he displayed. Second, for Harry himself, it was a necessary and brutal pressure valve. Without Tom and the other Death Eaters, Harry needed to find ways to push himself to be ready for the coming confrontation with Dumbledore. Knowing that failure would not be an option once he learned the truth of the fate that once tied Harry and Tom together, he just channeled all his focus into his magical abilities. It was the only way he knew how to endure the storm of time that plagued him leading up to Valentine's Day. Agonizing it may have been, but the day had finally arrived. The weight of anticipation, a crushing burden he had carried for what felt like an eternity, had culminated in this very moment. The letter he had long been expecting came at breakfast while he was among his fellow Slytherins. It wasn't delivered by a great, official owl, nor did it bear any ostentatious ministry seal. It was a simple parchment envelope, tucked discreetly between a copy of the Daily Prophet and his goblet of pumpkin juice. It was simply addressed to Harry Potter, scrawled in elegant, familiar handwriting that somehow conveyed both importance and secrecy. The teen's eyes swept the great hall, a furtive, almost paranoid movement, before they settled on the head table. He noted immediately that Dumbledore was conspicuously absent from breakfast. That fact alone sent a cold, clinical certainty through him. This letter was the signal, the commencement he had been waiting for. With a heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs, yet maintaining an outward mask of Slytherin composure, he tore into the letter. The sound of the parchment ripping seemed deafening in the low morning chatter of the hall. His companions, Blaise, Zabini, and Theodore Nott, cast him curious, calculating glances, but respected the unspoken rule of Slytherin discretion. They would wait. They would watch. Their questions would be asked later. For now, the world narrowed to the single sheet of thick parchment he was unfolding. Tonight, 9 p.m., be ready. Harry's heart was now thundering, a frantic drumbeat against his ribs that he could no longer ignore. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears, a rushing sound that almost drowned out the low murmur of the great hall. Despite the adrenaline surging through his veins, or perhaps because of it, he couldn't fight the slow, confident smirk that stretched across his face. To his right, Daphne leaned into his side, her warmth a grounding presence amidst the nervous energy thrumming through him. She was clearly interested in the correspondence he'd received, her proximity less a romantic gesture and more in curiosity and shared ambition. Her light eyebrows were furrowed in concentration as she tried to subtly angle her head to read the elegant script on the parchment in his hand. Harry's gaze remained fixed on the words. He was past mere interest. He was nearly shaking in anticipation now, a physical manifestation of the intense, focused energy he'd cultivated for months. All his work would pay off tonight. This wasn't just another scheme or a successful exam grade. This was the culmination of his will. The air around him seemed to thicken with possibility, charged with the energy of a destiny finally being seized, not merely accepted. Tonight, the threads of fate, so painstakingly woven, would be knotted into a single, powerful cord. Destiny awaited. Harry said nothing further as he rose from his forgotten breakfast and strolled out of the great hall. He would need to alert Tom, and he would need to prepare mentally for what was to come. "Oh, it's all going to be different after tonight," Harry whispered to Daphne. The air in the Slytherin fifth-years boys' dormitory was thick with a quiet tension, a silent world built for two. Daphne had sought out Harry long before the other students had even considered retiring for the night, leaving them the room entirely to themselves. The ambient light filtering in from the common room below cast long, dancing shadows that did little to dispel the serious mood settling over them. Daphne had spent enough time in Harry's orbit, observing his moods and internal struggles, to recognize the familiar signs of him working himself into a particular state of mind, one often bordering on animalistic intensity or a deep, analytical focus that promised pain to his opposition. Standing directly in front of the bed where Harry sat rigid, she adopted a position of protective stillness. He was hunched over the stone floor from his bed, his posture loose but his eyes betraying the churning thoughts within. His hands, though seemingly resting lazily, were threaded behind her knees, grounding him to her presence. His head was nestled against her stomach, the soft, rhythmic press of her breathing a subtle counterpoint to his own racing thoughts. As she stroked his hair, a simple, comforting gesture that seemed to soothe the edges of his tension, she was clearly and consciously fishing for the thoughts that were surely about to spill out. She waited, offering her calm as an anchor, wishing to understand what was to come. When I met him, almost 3 years ago, I had no idea that this was where our paths would lead, Harry said softly, but tonight we make history. Daphne gently pushed Harry away and knelt to look him in the eyes. I've never wanted to pry, Harry. I've never wanted you to push me away, but this, who was your letter from earlier? Cupping the girl's cheeks with both hands, Harry grinned. Dumbledore. Daphne's eyes widened, but before she could speak, Harry put a finger on her lips. Say nothing. Even the walls here could have ears, nothing specific. In understanding, Daphne nodded. It was one of the things Harry genuinely enjoyed about the pureblood princess. She was as cunning as they came, and he did not need to spell the truth out for her. You're ready for this. As ready as I will ever be, Harry promised, rising to his feet. If everything goes to plan tonight, there will be no more hiding. The truth will all come out tonight. I'm happy for you, Daphne said softly, but Harry caught the hesitation in her tone. What is it? Harry asked, a bit of heat in his voice. Nothing, Daphne promised, but Harry took a dangerous step towards her. To the young witch's credit, she didn't back down, just let out a deep sigh. Is it wrong that I worry for you? Someone has too, Harry. There's nothing to worry about, Harry promised, his voice softening, as he leaned forward to whisper in Daphne's ear. I will have him with me. No further explanation was needed, and Daphne seemed to shiver at the sound of his soft voice as she slowly slid back away from him. I understand. I just wish we had more time. You are amazing, Harry, but it's monumental. You don't think I am ready, Harry accused, staring at the girl with narrowed eyes. Worse, Harry, Daphne said, placing a hand on his chest. I think you are. That is almost even more terrifying. Just be careful, we have only begun to accomplish what we are capable of together. Together? Harry asked softly. Well, you never exactly said it, but after everything. Daphne's uncertainty seemed to play at the front of her mind for the first time, as she paused at her words. No, you're right, Harry agreed. There is hardly anyone else. No one else would ever understand, not like you do. Then don't forget to come back to me, Harry, Daphne pleaded softly. That's all that matters. Not to him, Harry said, knowing what the cost of this victory could mean, and what Tom would do Tom to win if necessary, and I can't fail him. At what cost, though? Daphne asked, keeping her voice at a whisper. Any cost, Harry said simply, before he glanced at the clock on Nott's bedside table. I have to go. Good luck, Harry, Daphne said, as he turned his back on her with the intent to leave. I don't need luck. I have destiny on my side, Daph. Oh. When Harry finally reached the stone gargoyle guarding the headmaster's office, a deep, shuddering breath escaped him. A breath he realized he had been unconsciously holding since leaving the dungeons. His muscles were tight, his nerves humming with a mix of anticipation and dread. Daphne's final, cryptic words had echoed in his mind with every step, a weight pressing down on his chest. But as he stood before the silent, motionless statue, he consciously forced himself to shed that burden. There was no more time for hesitation, reflection, or the emotional turmoil of their farewell. It was time to clear his mind, to let go of regret and second-guessing, and focus entirely on the imminent confrontation. This was not merely a meeting or a discussion. It was the culmination of everything he had learned and suffered under the Dark Lord's tutelage, a final, decisive test. Tom had meticulously prepared him for a challenge designed not just to test his skill, but the depth of his transformation. Harry felt a grim, resolute certainty settle over him. Whatever horrors or mental traps awaited behind that moving statue, he would face them. He did not intend to fail. He could not fail. His future, and perhaps more, depended on him proving himself worthy of the dark mantle he was being prepared to wear. He gave the password, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The gargoyle sprang aside, revealing the spiral staircase that ascended into the unknown. Harry didn't even have to knock. The heavy oak door of the headmaster's office swung open silently at his mere approach. Stepping over the threshold, Harry felt the familiar pull of ancient magic woven into the room. But tonight, the atmosphere was different, charged with a heavy, unshakable finality. Dumbledore stood in the precise center of the circular office, not behind his half-moon desk, but amidst the glittering, whirring silver instruments that usually fascinated Harry. Tonight, they seemed to spin with a nervous energy that mirrored the tension in the air. The headmaster was clad in robes of deep, midnight blue, but the usual twinkle in his eyes was utterly absent. His face was etched with a grimness that went beyond worry or fatigue. It was the look of a man who had confronted a terrible truth and was preparing for the reckoning. It was the most somber Harry had ever seen him. "Good evening, Harry." Dumbledore's voice was low, carrying a deep resonance that did not quite mask the tremor of weariness beneath. "Good evening, Headmaster," the young wizard greeted, his own voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil churning in his gut. He didn't move past the entrance. An invisible boundary seemed to hold them both, separating their worlds for this last, necessary moment. Dumbledore slowly raised his gaze, meeting Harry's eyes, and there was a profound, sorrowful understanding in the clear blue depths. "We have a long night ahead, Harry," he cautioned, the words sounding less like a warning and more like a heavy, inescapable prophecy. Harry took a deep breath, the stale air of the office filling his lungs. "No more lies after tonight, sir. Only the truth." He spoke the promise with a conviction that felt absolute, oddly meaningful even to him. For too long, he had lived behind veils, woven by others and self-imposed. Now the time for facades was over. One way or another, whether by his choice or by the cruel hand of fate, his true, complex, and dark identity would be laid bare. The headmaster would finally have the full, unvarnished truth of the intricate, dangerous game that had been played. More importantly, Harry himself would have the truth, a truth he would share with Tom. Tonight, the masquerade ended. "No more lies," Dumbledore agreed. "I am afraid our journey will take us to some familiar places, and some not so, but first, a bit of explanation is required on my part. Will you indulge an old man along the way?" "Of course, sir," Harry promised, and he meant it with a solemnity that belied his age. His gaze was steady, fixed on the headmaster, a clear sign that this was not merely a promise made out of politeness or deference, but a genuine commitment to understanding the full scope of the situation. Beyond the profound, and frankly horrifying, truth of what happened all those years ago, the hidden machinations and devastating sacrifices that had shaped his entire life, the young man was genuinely, deeply curious as to why the headmaster had chosen the path he believed they walked on. Harry needed to know the genesis of this grand, painful strategy. He needed to understand the calculus that weighed secrecy and control against honesty and partnership. Perhaps, by peeling back the layers of Dumbledore's past decisions and motivations, it would shed essential light on how they all ended up on this perilous, morally gray course of action. This was not about forgiveness or condemnation, but about clarity. "Then we shall begin our journey," Dumbledore said, gesturing towards his fireplace, "at the Ministry of Magic." Harry's eyebrows furrowed at the man's words, but in truth, he knew that was where it would all begin. After all, Augustus had warned him all about the Department of Mysteries and the Hall of Prophecies. Slowly, Harry moved towards the fireplace. His heart smoothed into a soft rhythm of resolve that muffled into a rhythm against his ribs. Dumbledore gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a silent confirmation that the time for preparation was over and the moment for action had arrived. Taking a deep breath, Harry grasped a pinch of the shimmering emerald flue powder from the small, silver pot on the mantelpiece. He stepped into the hearth, dropped the powder with a steady hand, and clearly enunciated the destination. The Ministry of Magic. A rush of green flames enveloped him, a sensation that had long since lost its novelty, becoming a routine jolt instead. The spinning, sickening rush of the flue network lasted only a few dizzying seconds before he was smoothly ejected onto the polished marble floor of the ministry's atrium. He stumbled only slightly, catching his balance quickly. Looking up, he found himself in the colossal, echoing chamber. The golden statues of the Fountain of Magical Brethren gleamed dully under the enchanted ceiling, which was currently a deep, starry indigo, mirroring the evening sky. The vast arena, usually a hive of rushing, chattering witches and wizards, was eerily deserted. The day's work was over. The last of the ministry employees had clearly left, their footsteps silenced. The emptiness amplified the sheer scale of the atrium, making Harry feel smaller yet more focused. The silence was absolute, save for the faint, magical hum of the building itself, and it offered the perfect, undisturbed stage for whatever Dumbledore had planned for this late-night visit. Dumbledore appeared next to him, not from the fire, but out of thin air, a clear sign of apparition, but without the usual popping sound. The old man gave no indication of the magical wonder he had just conducted, but instead held a grim visage as he spoke. "I ensured none would see us come or go. It would not be wise for Tom to know we were here at this late hour together. Only suspicion would arise. This also gives us the rare ability to speak freely." "Refreshing," Harry said softly, glancing around as if expecting to catch a straggler from a late day at the ministry, but none came. The two figures, Dumbledore and his student, walked slowly and deliberately through the cavernous space. An absolute silence hung between them, a heavy, expectant void that seemed to absorb any stray sound. The only audible noise ahead was the soft, rhythmic splash of the magical fountain, a structure around which various magical creatures and wizards stood side by side. They proceeded without haste, the rhythmic scuff of their boots on the marble floor marking the passage of time. Dumbledore remained stiff, his long, silver beard resting on his emerald robes, his expression unreadable behind his half-moon spectacles. Harry kept his eyes forward, perhaps disturbed by the silence and gravity of the situation that lay ahead. It was only when they had reached the halfway point to the nearest gilded lift, a moment of transition from the vast hall to the next destination, that Dumbledore finally broke the silence. His voice, though soft, carried a weight of deep recollection. 16 years ago, he began, the words seeming to measure the distance of time and memory. I was conducting an interview for a teaching post. The applicant was a woman of singular claims, one who insisted she held the divine sight of a true seer, a woman who wished to teach divination at Hogwarts. He paused, a faint flicker of a complex emotion, perhaps regret, perhaps amusement crossing his eyes. You will understand, perhaps, when I say that I never put much stock into magic my own wand could not comprehend, Dumbledore said lightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, as if he were trying to make a gentle joke out of a profound truth. He paused, his bright blue eyes twinkling with a shared secret. I have always been a pragmatist. Prophecy, divination, these fields have always skirted the edge of what I consider reliable knowledge, bordering on even theatrical for my tastes. Dumbledore gestured for Harry to enter the lift before him, and the teen followed cautiously as the headmaster continued. Regardless, he continued, the light tone not entirely disguising a certain profound curiosity that even he could not always suppress, I decided to grant the woman an interview. She was, quite frankly, a disastrous applicant for the divination post. Her answers were vague, her mannerisms overly dramatic, and she seemed to possess a rather spectacular inability to read even the simplest tea leaves. It was a dull state of affairs for 45 minutes, Dumbledore sighed, a touch of weary recollection in his voice. 45 minutes, he emphasized. Longer than I would grant most applicants, I assure you, out of sheer politeness and perhaps a residual hope that she might accidentally stumble upon a coherent thought. I asked about her methods, her lineage, her experience, and received only misty, self-aggrandizing pronouncements about the inner eye and celestial alignments. Closing the lift door behind them and hitting the button at the bottom, the elevator began its descent as Dumbledore continued to speak. I was just prepared to dismiss the woman, to politely thank her for her time, and send her on her way with a regretful, yet firm, refusal, when the atmosphere in that small, private room above the Hog's Head Inn changed entirely. The shift was instantaneous, profound, and utterly beyond anything I have ever witnessed. It was then that something extraordinary occurred. Harry felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, a primal instinct screaming a warning, as the lift chimed in an automated, hollow voice, announcing their destination with chilling neutrality. Department of Mysteries. The sound seemed to echo in the confined space, a pronouncement of entry into a labyrinthine shadow. Dumbledore, an unnervingly calm figure in the face of this oppressive atmosphere, exited the lift first, his half-moon spectacles catching the faint, cold light of the corridor. Harry followed, a puppet on invisible strings, his movements hesitant and deliberate. Every fiber of his being yearned to refuse this final step, but the cold, hard logic of their plan kept his feet moving. He still had a part to play, a sickening role as the unwitting lure in the elaborate, high-stakes trap set for his headmaster. He bit down on his tongue, hard, the sharp, agonizing pressure a necessary anchor in the swirling chaos of his fear. He continued to press until the familiar, metallic, iron-like taste of blood, a taste he had come to associate with crucial moments of this clandestine war, began to seep into his mouth. With a calculated, almost surgical precision, he wiped his mouth with his finger, ensuring he collected a sufficient sample. His gaze fell upon the locket nestled against his robes, the object a focal point of his deceit. It was the final, irreversible action, the signal. The unique, powerful magical signature carried within his blood would instantly be recognized by Tom, alerting him that the trap was sprung. The bait was in position, and the moment for his arrival was rapidly approaching. The silence of the Department of Mysteries pressed in on him, heavy with anticipation and the scent of impending, dark magic that would certainly follow. Harry followed Dumbledore in silence, the echoing footsteps of their shoes the only sound disturbing the stillness of the Department of Mysteries. They navigated a labyrinth of narrow, unmarked hallways, the air growing thick with the scent of old parchment and the faint, metallic tang of residual magic. Each turn seemed to deepen the sense of profound secrecy and historical weight that permeated the Ministry's most guarded section. Their journey eventually terminated before a large, imposing metal door. It was wrought from a dark, unidentifiable alloy, completely seamless and utterly devoid of any visible handles or keyholes. It radiated a faint chill that Harry could feel even from a distance. Dumbledore paused, his expression solemn, a gravity settling upon his usually twinkling eyes that Harry rarely witnessed. "Before we step across this threshold, Harry," Dumbledore spoke, his voice low and carrying the resonance of a man burdened by immense knowledge, "I must impress upon you the true magnitude of what we are about to discuss. You see, a prophecy was given that day. Not merely a premonition or a hopeful guess, but a genuine, immutable prophecy. A declaration of destiny whispered from the very fabric of time." Dumbledore reached out, his long, delicate fingers tracing an invisible pattern on the cold metal surface. With a soft click and the low groan of ancient, heavily charmed mechanisms, the massive door began to slide inward, revealing a chamber beyond that was plunged into a deep, supernatural gloom. "And this is not hearsay, Harry," Dumbledore continued, his gaze fixing intently on the young man before the door fully opened. "This is a fact confirmed by the unspeakables themselves. They heard it, they documented it, and it is sealed within their archives. It is real, Harry, and it is about you as well as the Dark Lord." The door opened, and Harry felt his stomach drop. This was it. Finally, the truth, and he stepped past Dumbledore into what he knew could only be the Hall of Prophecy. Snape had once unwittingly shared half of the prophecy with Harry and Tom, but today they would know it all in totality. Destiny awaited, Chapter 85. There were hundreds of orbs. No, there had to be thousands, an entire celestial archive captured within this chillingly silent chamber. Each glass sphere, roughly the size of a tennis ball, glowed with a faint, ominous light. Harry's eyes shifted nervously from left to right, scanning the seemingly endless ranks of shelves that stretched into the echoing darkness, as if he expected a phantom ambush to burst forth from the high rows. The air was cold, sterile, and heavy with the dust of possible futures. Dumbledore, however, seemed utterly at ease. He walked with a casual, measured step down the lanes, his long, silver beard catching the faint luminescence of the orbs as he passed them. 92, 93, 94, he murmured, his voice a low, resonant counterpoint to the monumental silence, counting the rows not with bureaucratic precision, but with a sense of intimate familiarity. He did not explain, nor offer a guiding word. Instead, he merely led them deeper into this crystalline maze. The frantic, trapped beating heart in Harry's chest seemed to want to tear itself free, a captive bird slamming against the bars of his ribs. He watched the headmaster's retreating form, a beacon of bewildering conviction, guiding him toward a destined path that Harry knew, with a certainty colder than the chamber's air, would never materialize. He had ensured that. Tom and Harry had taken the necessary, irrevocable steps to wrench their lives free from the cold, predestined grip of this very place. Tom had destroyed any chance of the prophecy coming true. Not with a burst of heroic defiance, but with calculated, quiet subversion. Yet still, the raw, unadulterated truth of what could have been, the life, the battles, the end point Dumbledore believed was waiting, was intensely intriguing to Harry. It held a dark, morbid fascination, perhaps even more so considering the immense, almost fanatical stock Dumbledore placed in these fragile glass prisons of fate. Every step Dumbledore took was an affirmation of a reality that Harry had already betrayed, and the tension between the world Dumbledore saw and the secret world Harry inhabited was a palpable, dangerous thing. Suddenly, Dumbledore stopped, his gaze directed at a particular point that was above eye level. The old man said nothing, and Harry approached his headmaster, eyes attempting to spot what stole the man's attention, and it didn't take long to do so. There on a shelf, just at the end of an arm's reach, sat an orb with a dilapidated tag that read, SPT to APWBD Dark Lord and Harry Potter. It felt like Harry's stomach was moving up into his throat now. Somehow, the thought of prophecy felt heavier than it ever had before as he stared up at the glass ball with a tag that held his own name. Dumbledore's aged, nimble fingers closed around the crystal orb and lifted it from the dusty, velvet-lined shelf with ease, the small sphere looking no heavier than a snitch in his palm. He turned it slowly, the faint light of other prophecies catching the chaotic, swirling clouds of iridescent smoke trapped within its glass confines. It was a beautiful object, deceptively benign, yet holding a history stained with blood and marked by monumental loss. So much death and destruction, Dumbledore began, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to fill the quiet, shadowed room, all over a few words and such a small, fragile object. He tilted his head, his brilliant blue eyes, usually twinkling with amusement, now clouded with a deep-seated sadness as he gazed at the orb. Look closely at it, Harry. It is, in its essence, nothing more than silica and air. It possesses no inherent magic to command fate or raise the lives of others. He held the orb out slightly, urging Harry's attention. It is the meaning we ascribe to it, the power we choose to give this prophecy, this ancient piece of magic that makes it so incredibly dangerous. It is human ambition, Harry, and its endless capacity for avarice and terror that transmutes this simple object into a weapon of mass destruction. Understand that the true peril lies not in the glass ball, but in the obsession its words breed. The bitter irony of the headmaster's pronouncements was a sharp, almost physical sensation in Harry's chest. Dumbledore spoke with such unshakable conviction, as if he were teaching Harry a valuable lesson. It was painfully clear that the elderly wizard was utterly clueless about the true weight and depth of the statements he so casually misinterpreted. Harry entertained the morbid thought. How profoundly different their world would be if Dumbledore and Snape had not placed such catastrophic, unwavering stock in the flimsy, dramatic ramblings of Sybil Trelawney. A single, vague prophecy, delivered by a woman who could barely predict the weather, had been treated as divine scripture, shaping policies, personal sacrifices, and ultimately the fates of entire families. The obsessive focus on the chosen one, and the subsequent, often cruel, machinations designed to fulfill the prophecy had done more to create the monster they feared than any dark magic. The Tom Riddle that Harry had come to know was a man of devastating precision. That Tom would never stoop to base superstition or allow his grand designs to be governed by such imprecise, ethereal magic. His contempt for the unquantifiable and the weak-willed was absolute. Yet, it was a terrifying possibility that the creature Lord Voldemort had become, the monster fueled by fear, power, and the ritualistic dismemberment of his own soul, had regressed. Perhaps that later, fractured entity had indeed become paranoid enough, weakened in mind and soul, to fall victim to the very kind of flimsy, self-fulfilling prophecy that the younger, sharper Tom Riddle would have scorned as beneath him. It was a cycle of fear breeding fear, with a cryptic prediction acting as the catalyst that may one day breed the bloodiest events in wizarding history, just not as the prophecy would have imagined. "I understand," Harry said simply, and held out his own hand for the prophecy. Dumbledore held the teen's gaze for a long moment, before handing over the prophecy. As the cold glass ball touched Harry's fingers, he felt his magic interact with the ambient nature of its creation. Old magic had allowed Trelawney's words to flow into this small orb, and Harry had no time to contemplate its complex nature before a woman's voice began echoing around the halls with a chilling style of contralto. "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will make him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." The crystal ball, a moment ago a harmless orb containing a vision of the past, slipped through Harry's numb fingers as the last, chilling words echoed in the sudden silence of the room. "Neither can live while the other survives." The prophecy, spoken by Trelawney more than a decade prior, had been the driving force behind the original conflict between Voldemort and the Potters, felt like a curse newly cast. The ball didn't just fall. It crashed on the polished stone floor with a deafening shatter that seemed to reverberate through Harry's soul. The sound was a harsh, final punctuation mark on the revelation, starkly louder than it should have been, a physical manifestation of the shattered fate they had narrowly avoided. A crushing weight settled upon Harry. It was an oppressive, suffocating burden, heavier than any physical weight he had ever known. He felt the sheer gravity of what that prophecy had entailed, a predetermined, lethal confrontation. Despite the years they had spent together, despite the complicated, entwined path Tom and Harry had forged, one of mutual understanding, and even, impossibly, familial affection, the raw, brutal finality of the original pronunciation was overwhelming. In the heaviness of the moment, Harry found a core of cold resolve. The world around him had narrowed to the sound of his own ragged breath and the unbearable pressure of Dumbledore's hand. He wasn't sure when the shock had compelled him to take a knee, the stone floor biting through his robes, but the hand of the old man, warm and paternal on his shoulder, felt like a brand. Dumbledore, in his boundless, well-intentioned wisdom, undoubtedly believed he was offering solace, a grounding anchor in the tempest of the teen's anguish. Instead, Harry felt only a searing indictment, a false comfort that only amplified the betrayal. The words he had just heard, the stunning truth laid bare, could not alter the course they were on. Instead of breaking him, the truth galvanized him. Harry understood, with a chilling clarity that superseded grief, that he needed to become the unyielding counterforce to the machinery of fate, the very path Tom had first set them upon. The true conflict was no longer a matter of good versus evil in the simplistic sense the public believed. It was defiance against predestination, a furious, desperate clawing against the pre-written script. In this moment, the absolute irony of his situation was a bitter gall in his throat. The only living person capable of stopping them, of truly derailing the intricate, dark plan Harry and Tom had woven between them, was the very man whose comforting grip currently pinned him in place, whose luminous blue eyes were clouded with what Harry now knew to be a mixture of genuine affection and profound, self-serving misconception. the silent plea in Dumbledore's touch, a plea for Harry to relinquish the darkness both of them knew he had, to return to the light, was utterly lost. It was not a plea Harry could answer, not when the path of the light had led him to this precipice. He felt the insidious strength of the dark arts Tom had taught him pulse through his body, and knew that the power coursing through him would guide him to victory. Lowering his head, Harry began a silent, ruthless evaluation of his current predicament and his available options. Dumbledore, the man who had orchestrated this entire theatrical confrontation, truly believed this agonizing moment was the climax. The final, definitive turning point that would irrevocably sever the darkness gripping Harry and bring him back into the safe, predictable fold of the light was a profound mistake. This game was far from being over. The intricate, high-stakes conflict had only just narrowed down to its final few combatants, and Harry was no longer just a piece on someone else's board. He was the architect of his own destiny, thanks to Tom, and the true contest was now between the person Dumbledore wished he was and the lethal force he had become. The subtle, cold thrill of utter freedom and power coiled tight in his chest. Dumbledore had miscalculated the depth of his transformation, confusing weariness with surrender and strategic silence with defeat. Harry knew, with chilling certainty, that the real battle was just on the horizon. Rising to his feet, Harry said nothing, and allowed Dumbledore to guide him out of the Hall of Prophecies and back towards the lift that would take him to the lobby. In any other circumstance, the Department of Mysteries would have intrigued him, but instead he solidified himself in what was to come. Dumbledore would have to die tonight, otherwise a horrible fate could await Harry. Tom was very patient with his apprentice, but after months of planning, failure tonight would not be an option. Neither the headmaster nor student said a word all the way to the atrium. The silence that stretched between them was heavy, weighted with unspoken accusations, and the raw, stinging realization of what the future held. Dumbledore walked with an uncharacteristic solemnity in his step. His eyes, usually twinkling with benign mischief, were shadowed with a deep, weary sadness. He must have believed that the best course of action was to allow Harry the space and time to process the devastating news he had just delivered. He likely saw the rigid set of the boy's shoulders and the averted gaze as symptoms of shock and grief, a necessary period of quiet internalization before the torrent of emotion would inevitably break. Harry, however, was not grieving or processing in the way the headmaster assumed. His silence was a careful, hard-won shield. Beneath the veneer of stunned compliance, a cold, crystalline fury was beginning to form. Every step he took down the hallowed corridors of the ministry felt like a betrayal. His family had trusted Dumbledore, but clearly that trust was misplaced. They finally made it to the wide, echoing space of the atrium, the sounds of distant employee chatter and the faint rush of the fountain, a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet they had maintained. As they reached the area that would lead them to the Floo network, Dumbledore attempted to slip his hand onto Harry's shoulders in a gesture of paternal comfort, a soft, encouraging pressure meant to convey sympathy and support in the face of a heavy burden that potentially awaited. That touch was the razor's edge that finally broke Harry's carefully maintained composure. The phantom warmth of the headmaster's hand felt like a shackle, a final, unbearable intrusion into his personal space. All the suppressed anger was a hot sting of being that brought him back to the reality of what was to come. The silent, obedient facade shattered instantly, replaced by a raw, instantaneous surge of fury. Shaking off the old man's hand, Harry reached into his robe pockets and unsheathed his wand, holding it tightly in his grip. Tom knew where he was, and Harry wondered if one last test awaited him. The locket would have notified Tom that Harry was ready for the final confrontation, and his lack of arrival spoke monuments of what the man expected. Taking a deep breath, Harry glared at the man in front of him, knowing what must be done, and Dumbledore recoiled from the look visibly. "You've known my entire life that I would have to face him, and you did nothing to prepare me." Harry's voice was low, a quiet venom seeping into the air, each word a carefully measured accusation aimed squarely at the old man. The years of rage and the terrifying realization of his former destiny coalesced into that single, cutting statement. Dumbledore, however, did not flinch beneath the onslaught of the teenager's anger. Instead, he met the charge with a soft, almost pitying accusation of his own. Prepare you, he repeated, his azure eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, now holding a depth of sorrow and a hint of reproach. By the end of your 3rd year, Harry, you were one of the most gifted students this school has seen in generations. Your power was evident, your potential undeniable. Do you truly believe, he paused, letting the weight of his question settle, that the rumors and talks of your extraordinary abilities, your successes in the face of insurmountable peril, did not reach my office? Harry froze instantly at the man's words. The venom dissipated, replaced by a sudden, chilling clarity. He realized, with a sickening jolt, that Dumbledore had subtly increased the distance between them, taking several unhurried paces away, as if the aged wizard could physically sense the tumultuous, perhaps dangerous, intentions that had been swirling within the young man's mind just moments before. It was a subtle act of defense, or perhaps a demonstration of preternatural awareness that further unnerved Harry. Do you truly believe, Dumbledore pressed on, his voice losing its softness and gaining a resonant, piercing quality, the tone of a man who sees through all deceptions, that I am so utterly ignorant of what has transpired within the walls of my own castle over the last 2 years? Did you truly expect me to believe that you achieved this level of prodigious talent, this control over magics far beyond your age group, without assistance, without guidance, without a teacher? Dumbledore's voice dropped, becoming a sharp whisper that cut through the silence of the room, fixing Harry with a stare that demanded honesty. Tell me, Harry, did you expect me to be blind to the fact that you have found yourself a master of the dark arts to guide you? Harry's jaw tightened, the muscle clenching visibly beneath his skin, a silent testament to the surge of fury and apprehension that threatened to overwhelm him. He offered no verbal defense, the words caught in the vice grip of his controlled silence. The headmaster, however, took the conversational reins, his voice cutting through the tense air of the confrontation. It has been clear for quite some time, Dumbledore chastised. I ignored the rituals you conducted under the protection of Hogwarts, the old man stated, his eyes, usually twinkling with an inner amusement, now sharp and penetrating, focused solely on the dark apprentice before them. His own wand, a long, slender piece of elder wood, was now clearly and deliberately displayed in his hand, a nonverbal warning of his readiness. I chose to overlook them initially. Many powerful witches and wizards have delved into those ancient, often forbidden, magics before you, after all. And you, Harry, were precisely the type of brilliant, ambitious wizard who would dare to attempt such dangerous feats. He paused, a flicker of what might have been regret crossing his features, quickly replaced by stern resolve. But it wasn't your abilities that betrayed you, or your elaborate defenses that gave way to the truth, the headmaster continued, his tone hardening. It was your sheer, unshakable confidence, your absolute, arrogant certainty in everything you did, in every move you made, that finally gave me a hint to the truth of what was happening behind the scenes. The old man paused for a long moment before launching the first accusation. Tell me, Harry, what really happened that day, the day Ginny Weasley disappeared? I had only wanted to clear my name, Harry declared, his voice cutting across the headmaster's soft, measured tones with an edge of defiance and cold certainty. Ever since Mrs. Norris was petrified that Halloween, the eyes of the castle were on me. They all told each other lies and started rumors about me, trying to claim that I was the heir of Slytherin causing those attacks. When I saw Ginny writing on the wall outside Moaning Myrtle's bathroom on the 2nd floor, I chose to confront her. Harry paused, his gaze fixed on the older man, reliving the memory of the day that changed his life. I had wanted to make her confess and drag her to the Aurors to clear my name. His expression darkened, the bitterness of that revelation still palpable. But it wasn't Ginny, not truly. Deep within the depths of the chamber, I didn't encounter a terrified first year. I encountered the fully resurrected form of Tom Riddle, a younger, yet utterly recognizable, version of the monster who had murdered my parents and tried to murder me. Dumbledore's aged, sky-blue eyes, usually sparkling with mischief or deep wisdom, were now narrowed, etched with a profound sorrow that mirrored the tragedy unfolding before him. He studied Harry, the boy he had once sworn to protect, now a formidable and dangerously confident young man. Dumbledore was silently. frantically piecing together the fragments of Harry's shattered past and corrupted present, trying to decipher the precise sequence of failures and manipulations that had led to this terrifying confrontation. The teen, however, did not grant him the luxury of prolonged suspense. "I was scared at first, Headmaster. Terrified even," Harry confessed, the memory flashing behind his vivid green eyes. The truth of Harry's words resonated with an unnerving, absolute sincerity. He continued, his voice steadying as he recalled the turning point. "We dueled, and he could have killed me a dozen times over. Tom was a force of nature, an insurmountable wall. But instead of the killing blow, he just saw all the potential I had, all the raw, untamed power that you, with your gentle hands, were afraid to let me wield. And he pushed me. He didn't just teach me, he forged me in the fires of true conflict, demanding every ounce of my will and talent." A small, unsettling smile played on Harry's lips. "When it was all said and done, he didn't kill me. He didn't discard me. Instead, he took me under his wing, offering the power and protection you never would." Harry began to pace in the vast, echoing atrium, his movements panther-like and assured, a stark contrast to the nervous energy of the boy Dumbledore remembered upon their first meeting. "You wouldn't believe the crimes we committed together, Dumbledore," Harry chuckled, a chilling sound devoid of mirth. "The necessary evils, the steps we took, the blood we spilled to ensure our victory. Steps you would have condemned me for, yet steps that have brought us to this precipice of victory, of domination." Scoffing now, a short, sharp sound of dismissal, Dumbledore slowly shook his head, his blue eyes clouded with disappointment. "You are being used, Harry, cruelly and cynically used. Voldemort wants you as a weapon, a tool forged to fight his war and secure his dominance, nothing more. You are a means to an end, nothing more, nothing less." "You will never understand our bond," Harry spat. Dumbledore looked like he was going to say something else, but then asked, "All these lies, Harry, how did you live with it? You lied to your friends, and 2 young women died on this path you chose. I am guessing others as well." "Dozens," Harry agreed, and decided to rub salt on the wound, maybe even 100. As Harry said this, his wand moved slowly over his face, and a golden mask materialized around him. "We've even fought before, Dumbledore. Perhaps this is a face you remember." Dumbledore stilled and took a visible step backwards. "Impossible." "Nothing is impossible when it comes to Tom," Harry said simply, waving his wand again and vanishing the mask in the process. "I underestimated you, Harry," Dumbledore said numbly. "What really happened at Greengrass Manor? What truly befell Lord Greengrass, and how was young Astoria's blood curse broken?" "Daphne and I spent an entire summer digging into the deepest, darkest parts of magical Britain's history to find a cure," Harry boasted. "It took us almost an entire year before it was all said and done, but we developed a ritual together, and the sacrifices that were needed, she was quite willing to make to see to the safety of her sister." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "You sacrificed a link to the bloodline to eradicate the curse." "Along with blood from the surviving members of the immediate family," Harry added. "It was inherently ugly but effective. Astoria is cured." "At the cost of her father's life," Dumbledore said coldly. Snorting, Harry shook his head. "A price worth paying. Yes, now Astoria is cured, but also her daughters or Daphne's daughters will never be held under such a burden. Never again will this blood curse reappear. It was a price worth paying, considering who had to pay it." The weight of Harry's confession seemed to visibly settle upon Dumbledore's shoulders. The headmaster looked infinitely older, his usual grand composure crumbling beneath the crushing realization of his own errors. "I have failed you, Harry," Dumbledore said softly, the words a penitent whisper in the charged air. He didn't offer an excuse or a justification, only the stark admission of his monumental failure. Harry stopped his packing abruptly, his retort sharp and dismissive. He scoffed, a short, violent expulsion of air. "Staying out of my way, avoiding me, it was the best gift you could have given me, Headmaster. Your refusal to truly guide me, to show me the ruthlessness required, created a void Tom was more than happy to fill. Your absence was my opportunity." Harry ceased all movement now, his body coiled with lethal focus. He thrust his wand directly towards the headmaster's chest. The old man frowned, a deep furrow appearing between his silver brows, yet he did not even attempt to raise his own wand in defense. He simply observed the young wizard, the prodigy twisted by a darker mentorship. "You are a talented wizard, Harry," Dumbledore acknowledged, his voice retaining a surprising measure of calm, a final, desperate attempt at reason. "All the unnatural steps you have taken, all the dark magic you have mastered, the unforgivable acts you have committed, have undoubtedly prepared you for this moment, honed you into a weapon. Despite all of this, you must know in your heart that you are no match for me. Your power is great, but my experience is century deep. Put your wand down, Harry. Disarm yourself, and perhaps, just perhaps, we can still come to an accord, an arrangement that does not require the ultimate destruction you clearly seek." "I have to do this," Harry said softly. "It is the only way." Without another moment of hesitation, Harry's wand surged forward, and the duel began. Sorry to drag this out, but we are reaching a climatic point. I will try to get the next chapter out later this week. I am working on it as we speak. Also, I want to give you guys more updates, so if I finish the update on a Sunday, I am going to go ahead and post. This just means you won't necessarily get updates every Tuesday, but I will make sure you get one every 7 days no matter what. But there has been several times I had an update ready on Sunday and didn't post, because I wanted you guys to have it on schedule. I think you will get more if I just live up to the receive as I write, but wanted you guys to be aware in case I post on Friday and you don't get another one until the next Friday or sooner. Cheers, Chapter 86. Avada Kedavra, Harry roared out, the deadly emerald green curse tearing from his wand in a streak of pure malice and intent. The spell shot towards Dumbledore, who remained surprisingly composed as he whipped his wand forward to meet Harry's spell. Dumbledore met the killing curse not with a shield, but with a massive, churning hex of vibrant scarlet that Harry didn't recognize. The red hex slammed into the unforgivable curse, stopping the spell dead in midair. For a tense, agonizing moment, the two elemental forces were held in a violent collision, green and red light battling for dominance, the air crackling with immense, unrestrained power. Harry, however, was not one to wait for a stalemate to resolve. He didn't hesitate, refusing to give Dumbledore a moment to analyze his next move. He intended to use his speed to his advantage. With a whip-like motion, he discarded the stalled exchange of spells, twisting his wand hand sharply to the side to break the focus on the life-ending curse. He didn't wait for the two spells to dissipate. Instead, he reared back, his eyes blazing with emerald fire as he conjured actual, raw, magical flame in his hands. This was no simple incendio, but parcel magic at its finest. Harry pushed his magic into the torrent of flames, helping it form into a gargantuan green serpentine beast. With a forceful thrust of his arms, the shimmering emerald-green serpent surged forward with the intent to immolate the headmaster. Harry's lips curled into a predatory grin at the successful, terrifying conjuration. Unfortunately, his success was short-lived as Dumbledore ripped his wand diagonally and dismembered Harry's creation with ease. Harry's stomach sank for a moment as he remembered just who he was facing, and why Tom had once avoided confrontation with this man, even in his magical prime. I don't need to win, Harry knew. I just have to prove myself to Tom. He will come. The thought crossed his mind, but it barely had time to coalesce as the water from the fountain sprung to life and enveloped Harry in the blink of an eye. Suddenly, he was drowning in a massive pool of water. Harry flailed around as he attempted to swim his way out of it, but the more he resisted, the stronger the whirl of the water was, and he knew he had to act fast. With his wand in hand, he surged his magic downwards, pulling all the water around him down with him, causing a massive splash. As he barely landed on his feet, the backlash of the spell sent Dumbledore backwards, and Harry chose to capitalize on it as he hissed out a spell that caused a black wave of magic to surge towards the old man. Dumbledore met the spell with magic Harry couldn't even begin to fathom, and in return, Harry whipped the spell around and exerted a wave of magical force forward, catching the old man by surprise as he stumbled backwards. The backlash of Harry's spell destroyed nearly every glass pane in the atrium, and he decided to use this to his advantage as he began to summon it all into the air. Dumbledore merely stared at Harry's display of glass rising in the air with disinterest. Harry, his face a mask of strained concentration and youthful rage, sent the glass careening towards the old headmaster. The attack, however, was shattered in the space of a heartbeat. The moment the glass would have reached him, the headmaster didn't hesitate. With a silent, almost casual flick of his wand, Albus Dumbledore transfigured the entirety of Harry's spell mass into a harmless, cascading shower of fine sand that rained down around them on the ruined stone floor of the chamber. But the old man was not done. Even as the sand fell, one piece, a sliver of the original transfigured magic, shaped now into a needle-sharp projectile of glass, was sent right back at Harry with lightning speed. It struck the teen like a viper's fang, slicing viciously across his cheekbone. The teen's hand shot instinctively to his face, his fingers immediately slick with the warm rush of blood. He grunted, a sharp, choked sound of pain and surprise, as the crimson liquid began to flow freely, staining his pale skin. Dumbledore regarded the wounded boy over the half-moon spectacles perched on his nose, his expression one of profound, weary disappointment. He allowed the silence to stretch, broken only by the drip of blood onto the floor and Harry's ragged breathing, before delivering his critique in a voice that was calm, yet undeniably sharp. "If this paltry display is all the magic Tom taught you, Harry," Dumbledore said, his gaze unwavering, "then I confess myself disappointed. Your master has failed you." Roaring out in rage, Harry made eye contact with the man and attempted something he had been avoiding with the man for nearly 3 years. Legillms. The moment Harry entered the man's mind, he knew he had made a dreadful mistake. While Snape and Barty had both been accomplished occlumens, it was clear the headmaster was in an entirely different category, one Harry had never even imagined. Harry was plummeting through the void of the sky, a dizzying, uncontrollable descent where his body spun like a discarded toy. Every muscle fought against the relentless, invisible force pulling him down, yet the struggle was futile. He was a ragdoll surrendered to the pull of gravity. Below him, the world was an impenetrable blackness, the ground lost in a miasma of shadow and distance. The altitude was immense, the air so desperately thin that each gasping inhale felt like sucking on a straw blocked by cotton wool. His lungs burned, screaming for the dense, rich oxygen of lower altitudes. A relentless, icy wind, born of speed and height, hammered against him. It roared past his ears, a deafening, high-pitched shriek that threatened to tear the very breath from his chest, whipping his clothes and hair into a chaotic frenzy. His skin prickled with cold, and the sheer velocity of his fall blurred the few distant stars above into streaks of white fire. He was utterly alone, adrift in a terrifying, silent ocean of air, with nothing to break his fall and no idea what awaited him in the blackness below. A voice boomed so loudly his eardrums burned. "Foolish." Harry growled, a low, savage sound that vibrated deep in his chest, as his eyes frantically scanned the churning, boundless abyss of the sky around him. The mindscape he was trapped within was a terrifying canvas of nothingness, yet the pressure was immense, a palpable weight crushing down on his consciousness. Every occlumens, no matter how powerful, had an anchor, a vulnerability, a blind spot, and Dumbledore had to have one as well. He had to. The walls of this mental prison were beginning to contract, a dizzying, sickening sensation of being swallowed whole. The air felt thin, non-existent. The spiritual oxygen of his own mind felt limited, being ruthlessly siphoned away by the sheer, magnificent power of his opponent. A brief, cold spike of panic, sharp and visceral, pierced through his carefully constructed shields. Dumbledore wasn't merely probing. He was capable of a surgical, catastrophic vivisection of his very mind if he was so inclined, if he decided to unleash the full, terrifying might of his own legilimency. He had to move. Staying still was surrender, was certain defeat and madness. His entire being screamed for action, for a way out of this mental chokehold. He had to penetrate the formidable defenses of the old man's mind, had to find the fault line, the single infinitesimal fissure in that mountainous mental fortress, or he was utterly, irretrievably done for. His mental gaze darted and searched, a desperate, frantic butterfly against an insurmountable glass pane. Then, through the endless, crushing void, something moved. Not a star, not a shadow, but a brilliant, searing splash of color that seemed wholly out of place in the monochromatic terror. It was a fiery red creature in the distance, a point of pure, vibrant light in the suffocating dark, moving with an erratic, magnificent grace. A phoenix. Gotcha, Harry thought, a triumphant, almost manic spark igniting behind his eyes, a bolt of pure, icy-hot resolve replacing the panic. He had found his target, the anomaly in Dumbledore's perfect, terrifying emptiness. He turned his focus, pouring every ounce of his besieged will into tracing the path of that impossible, blazing bird. Harry surged through the air like a paraglider, the sheer force of his will acting as both his sail and his invisible harness. There was no magic circle, no incantation, and no visible propulsion, merely the raw, focused intent of a predator bearing down on its prey. He sliced through the freezing upper atmosphere towards the brilliant, fiery blur of the phoenix. The phoenix attempted to fly faster, its wings beating the thin air with desperate, blazing strokes. Its flight was a shimmering wake of heat and light, a frantic dance of avoidance against an unstoppable force. Yet, the phoenix's legendary speed was proving futile in this imaginary world. For Harry had found the infinitesimally small target in the otherwise infinite, dizzying expanse of the mountainous landscape below and the endless sky above. This wasn't merely tracking a moving object. It was a connection forged in the deepest recesses of his magical power, a telepathic lock that transcended distance and speed. From that moment, his pursuit became an inevitability. Harry was no longer a boy flying. He was a shark sensing the metallic tang of blood in the vast, dark ocean. The hunt was now a singular, driving imperative. Nothing in the heavens or on Earth, no defensive fire, no evasive maneuver, no magical barrier, would deter him from the capture of the fiery creature. His mind was a steel trap, his focus absolute, and the phoenix was already within its jaws. And when he connected, the world went dark, but only for a moment. Harry had intended to lance the man's mind with the mind arts, but instead he found himself sucked into a memory, and the scene shimmered, the opaque wall of thoughts dissolving to reveal a moment Harry had never imagined. Before him stood two teenagers, barely older than him. One was a young Albus Dumbledore, his auburn hair slightly disheveled, his gaze fiercely focused. The other was a handsome wizard with heterochromia eyes that held a dangerous spark of ambition, a face Harry couldn't place, but whose presence radiated an unsettling power. Their hands were pressed tightly together, palm to palm, and a dark, viscous crimson seeped from the point of contact, pooling between their forearms. A low, ancient incantation, a sibilant whisper of power, spilled from the young Dumbledore's lips. The words were unfamiliar at first, but as the chant reached its peak, Harry recognized the cadence, the unmistakable rhythm of an unbreakable oath. As the blood-packed sealed, a familiar locket, magically crafted and unnervingly cold even from this distance, began to slowly materialize in the space between their joined hands, pulsing with the dark energy of their shared commitment. Harry watched, a chilling realization settling in his stomach. He wondered if this very scene, this historical, deeply personal act of binding, had been the blueprint, the grim inspiration for Tom's own decision years later to forge a similar bond with Harry himself. It was a history he was privileged, or perhaps cursed, to witness. But the next shift in the memory was more jarring, more brutal. The calm of the ritual was shattered, replaced by the chaotic frenzy of a three-way duel. The sandy beach they stood on was now churned and smoking under the impact of powerful, uncontrolled magic. Blinding, multi-hued spells tore through the air. One stream of controlled, but lethal, silvery light came from the familiar wand of the young Albus Dumbledore. Another, darker, more aggressive barrage emanated from the handsome young man who had just sealed the pact. The third combatant, whose spells were wilder and infused with desperate anger, was a third wizard who could only be a relative of Dumbledore, perhaps an estranged brother, though Harry couldn't be certain in the chaos. It was a brilliant, terrifying spectacle, a whirlwind of three incredibly talented young wizards fighting with lethal intent, each spell a near miss of tragedy. Harry's eyes darted from one duelist to the next, a frantic attempt to comprehend the quickly evolving battle. The decision of where to focus was ripped from him by a sound that cut through the thunder of the dueling spells, a high-pitched, heart-rending scream. Harry whipped his head around, following the terrible sound. Down the sandy, blood-stained beach, he saw a young, dark-haired witch. She was dressed in a simple, light blue summer dress, a stark contrast to the violence surrounding her. But the innocence of her attire was brutally marred. A dark, rapidly blooming stain of blood was forming in the middle of her bodice, and her legs gave way, dropping her tragically to her knees in the wet sand, the life draining from her face even as her cry echoed over the waves. The duel had claimed its first, innocent victim. Suddenly, Harry felt a lurch and he was back in the Ministry atrium. Dumbledore was hunched over, heaving for breath, but Harry was wandless now and feeling exhilarated over his brief success. "Seems like Tom taught me enough." Dumbledore raised his wand, clearly prepared to neutralize Harry. The headmaster's expression was a mixture of deep regret, anger, and steely resolve, his blue eyes clouded with sadness. He saw this as a painful necessity, a means to an end for the greater good, a line he had drawn countless times before in his long life. Harry, sensing the inevitability and the sheer magical force arrayed against him, closed his eyes, awaiting the fate that awaited him. He braced for the familiar, sickening jolt of a powerful, stunning spell, or perhaps something even more specialized and restraining. But the stunning blow never came. Instead, the air between the two wizards crackled violently, not with the abrupt fizz of an intercepted spell, but with the protracted, loud sizzling of powerful defensive magic. It was the sound of a spell colliding with a shield of overwhelming protective intent, a sound Harry recognized instantly. When Harry opened his eyes, the world seemed to have tilted. Standing protectively in front of him was a smirking, familiar man. His long black robes billowed as if caught in a sudden, cold wind, and a deep, malicious power radiated across his sharp features. His hand, gripping a wand of Yule, was held low, indicating the effortlessness of the interception. "Get away from my apprentice, Dumbledore," the man drawled, his voice a silken, dangerous whisper that cut through the silence of the tense atrium. The atmosphere grew thick and heavy, but Harry's magic thrummed for blood like it never had before. They had the old man on the ropes, and this was their chance. "You have done beautifully," Tom said smoothly, as he summoned Harry's wand. He tossed the wand over his shoulder toward the young man, who was bracing his left arm against the pain of his encounter with his headmaster, completely bewildered by the turn of events. "Now let me take it from here." "It was foolish of you to come here tonight, Tom," Dumbledore chided. "You are interfering in matters beyond your comprehension, Dumbledore," Tom spat. "There will be no escape tonight. By the time your precious Aurors arrive, the Ministry shall be mine, and you shall be dead." With that, Tom let out a thundering green killing curse towards the headmaster. But this time, when Dumbledore tried to meet the curse in the middle, Harry didn't hesitate to try and eviscerate the man with dark magic. Unfortunately, the man was renowned for his skill for a good reason, and managed to sever the connection of the two colliding spells and stop Harry's as well. The older man slid a few feet backwards, the recoil of the simultaneous, powerful strikes momentarily throwing him off balance. Yet, the deep-set lines around his eyes and mouth only hardened, his usual twinkle replaced by a severity that Harry had never witnessed. It was the expression of a warrior who had been pushed into a corner, a look more unnerving than outright distress. Side by side, the master and apprentice stood, and Harry grinned for the first time all night. This is where the fun begins. In a display of perfectly coordinated power, Harry and Tom launched their unified assault on the battered old man. The very air around them crackled with raw magic. Beams of deep, colorful spells streaked across the atrium, impacting the headmaster's hastily erected shield with concussive force. Unlike their previous, solo attempts, this was a relentless, suffocating offensive. The headmaster, renowned for his strategic mind and formidable dueling skills, barely had time to defend himself. Gone were the elaborate, whimsical counterspells and the opportunity to launch a measured counterattack. The wizened wizard, his long silver beard whipping around his face with every violent deflection, was reduced to a blur of defensive spells. Shields shimmered and cracked, barriers flared and collapsed, and the ground around his feet became scorched earth from the constant magical bombardment. Each time he attempted to seize a momentary pause, each time he tried to turn the tides with a powerful, signature spell of his own, Harry and Tom were upon him instantly. They moved not as two separate duelists, but as two halves of a whole, a highly efficient magical engine. One would draw his attention with a feint of dark, crushing magic, forcing a concentrated defense, while the other would immediately exploit the distraction with a rapid-fire array of bright, piercing, offensive magic. The combined force was overwhelming, pushing the headmaster further and further into a desperate, purely reactive struggle for survival. Harry had never cast so fast in his life. He acted purely on instinct for an amount of time he was unable to discern. It was like running at a dead sprint, but he wasn't gaining any ground. Something had to change, and the rhythm of the duel had to break. Spellfire was traded so fast the world was being torn apart around them. Gone was the golden fountain that once stood. Gone was the elevator that had taken them to the Department of Mysteries. Even many of the Flu Network's fireplaces had been leveled. It was a thrilling moment for Harry as he fought side by side with his mentor with everything he had. It was like Gringotts, but better, and instead of being frightened like he was before, he was now invigorated by a moment that would likely be told throughout history. It was Harry who broke the monotony of the duel as he felt the wards around them shatter, and he wasted not even a single second as he apparated around the old man and slashed him across the chest with a deep cutting curse that dropped him to one knee. Dumbledore began bleeding heavily in an instant, but refused to relinquish his wand. Harry and Tom advanced on the man carefully, sensing victory, but not forcing their hand all at once. It was clear the man was going to use the destroyed wards to his advantage and get away, but Tom pointed his wand upwards, and a sandy mist enveloped them all. Harry knew even he could not apparate through whatever Tom had done, and the endgame was upon them. Dumbledore heaved a large cough that sent blood onto the atrium floor before he spat toward his former student. "Are you planning to tell him the truth, Tom, or shall I?" "What truth is that, Dumbledore?" Tom scolded. "There are no secrets between my apprentice and I." Dumbledore scoffed as he rose back to his feet. "Harry will find out the truth, one day, even if today is not that day. You will never win, Tom." Dumbledore thrust his arms upward, summoning Fawkes in a brilliant arc of scarlet and gold light. The phoenix materialized protectively above his head, letting out a loud screech, its eyes twin infernos. However, before the mythical creature could ignite into its fiery column of self-immolation, two simultaneous, lethal emerald bolts shot from Harry and Tom's wands, striking the great bird mid-shriek. The resulting gut-wrenching cry of pure defiance was abruptly silenced. The concentrated, potent magic instantly disintegrated the creature, proving too much even for a being of fire and rebirth. Fawkes' vibrant, living form collapsed into a swirling, pathetic cloud of fine black powdered dust that drifted down around Dumbledore's shocked, uncomprehending face. Absolute silence followed, broken only by the faint hiss of dissipating magical residue. "Your move, Dumbledore," Tom hissed, his voice a low, venomous sound that sliced through the tense silence of the Ministry atrium. The air crackled with a volatile energy that was less magical and more the raw, dangerous will of a predator challenging his ultimate prey. Dumbledore's usual facade of serene wisdom was momentarily shattered. His eyes, normally twinkling with a fierce, calculating light behind his half-moon spectacles, widened in a flash of genuine alarm. He had been so focused on a strategic exit that he hadn't accounted for the almost supernatural coordination between the two figures before him. Before the Hogwarts headmaster could even fully register the meaning of Tom's challenge, before his mind could formulate a counter-curse or even a protective shield charm, Harry moved. The spell was non-verbal, and it struck Dumbledore's hand with the precision of an assassin's dagger. The disarming charm, in Harry's execution, was not a simple schoolyard deflection. It was a vicious, forceful wrenching of the connection between a wizard and his ability to defend himself. The long, spiraled wand was ripped from Dumbledore's grasp. It spun in a tight, uncontrolled arc for a fraction of a second before Harry's left hand snapped out, catching the wand with practiced ease. His fingers closed around the wand's smooth length as if it were a common stick, but the second it touched Harry's hand, he knew something was different about this. A power he had never felt before surged through him, and the feeling of victory erupted through his veins. The old man's eyes widened in undisguised horror, a genuine terror that seemed to pierce through the practiced facade of the venerable headmaster. Harry, his face a mask of cold fury and unwavering intent, merely held both wands in a steady grip, pointing them directly at the older wizard. Dumbledore, seeing the lethal finality in the teen's posture, raised both hands slowly, a gesture of surrender and attempted de-escalation. His voice, though strained, retained a surprising measure of its customary measured tone. "You say there are no secrets, Tom," Dumbledore began, seizing upon the one thread of uncertainty he could perceive. "But tell me, does the boy truly know what resides within his scar? Does he know the secret to your own wretched, unnatural immortality?" Tom froze utterly at the old man's sudden, sharp words. The air in the atrium seemed to crystallize around the unexpected statement. Harry's eyebrows furrowed deeply as he glanced sharply between the two powerful wizards, the wands in his hands momentarily wavering only in his contemplation, not his resolve. The sheer fact that Tom did not immediately rebuke the explosive statement, the way the Dark Lord's carefully constructed composure fractured, and the look of surprise and calculated malice that flashed across his face surprised the teen. "It's true, Harry." Dumbledore's voice became clear, precise, and resonant, a desperate final grasp for a lifeline. "Your scar holds a Horcrux, a fragment of Tom's soul, a piece he ripped away through the foulest of magic when he attempted to murder you as an infant, when he murdered your mother." Dumbledore let the words hang in the stunned silence, his eyes fixed on Harry's. "It is why the two of you have always been so inextricably linked, why you share so much in terms of ability and even thought. And Harry, it is the fundamental reason why you are so impossibly powerful at your age, why your control over the dark arts has accelerated to a level no one could have predicted. You possess a key part of his magical essence." The revelation was a calculated strike, a desperate attempt to sever the bond Harry had forged with the Dark Lord, a bond Dumbledore now knew was far more insidious than simple apprenticeship. "That isn't true," Harry refused at once. "I would have known." "Face the facts, Harry, I beg of you," Dumbledore pleaded. Harry's eyes drifted towards his master, who merely stared at Dumbledore with furrowed brows for a long moment. Harry broke the silence. "Is it true, Tom?" Tom's eyes glanced at Harry for the briefest of moments, but he said nothing as he moved towards Dumbledore. When the two were less than a foot apart, Tom raised his wand and dug it into Dumbledore's defenseless cheek. "You're a fool, Dumbledore, and you are going to lose everything." "Afraid to admit the truth, Tom?" Dumbledore challenged, his voice thin but ringing with a desperate conviction as he attempted to jab a mental wedge between the Dark Lord and his apprentice. "I have suspected that a sliver of your soul resided within Harry for quite some time now. Tell him the truth." A thunderous, booming laugh erupted from Tom, rattling the very stones of the atrium within the ministry. He dug the tip of his intricately carved wand deeper into the old man's weathered cheek, the pressure causing Dumbledore's head to involuntarily turn, straining his neck. "Did you, old man?" Tom's voice was a deep, dangerous rumble, laced with contemptuous amusement. "Then you truly are a bigger fool than I ever imagined possible, if you thought that a mere suspicion was enough to win this day." With a sudden, sharp movement, Tom swept away from the pinned wizard, his robes swirling like a shadow, and turned his full, intense focus onto Harry. Yet his wand never wavered, remaining resolutely trained on Dumbledore, a silent, deadly promise. "He speaks a fraction of the truth, Harry, and only because he stumbled into it like the blind, arrogant fool he is," Tom confirmed, his crimson eyes boring into his apprentice's shocked face. "You were a Horcrux when we first met. A pitiful, accidental one, created when the broken remnant of my soul was driven from my body by the rebounded killing curse." He took a slow, deliberate step closer, watching the turmoil bloom in Harry's emerald eyes. "It was how we connected so easily when you first found the diary in your second year, prior to your foray into the Chamber of Secrets. That sliver of soul called out to the larger whole, a psychic beacon that allowed our minds to bridge the gap and communicate, spirit to spirit. Harry's arms trembled violently, the twin wands he held sagged in his grip, his magical focus dissolving entirely as his mind struggled to process the devastating admission. He nearly dropped the magical foci, a cold, sickening shock seizing him. "What?" he managed, the single word a mere broken whisper. The sharp, sudden quiver in Harry's voice was more than enough to indicate the complete, utter bewilderment and horror that gripped him. Tom watched him, a triumphant, almost predatory smile playing on his lips that never wavered. "Oh yes, my dear apprentice. You were the sixth, and utterly unintended, Horcrux of my older self. A wretched irony, was it not? The famed boy who lived, the destined defeater of my power, carrying a piece of that very soul within him." Tom allowed the moment of profound shock to linger, savoring the look of abject disbelief on Harry's face. "I discovered it, of course, after your very ritual. You went unconscious, and the coming-of-age ritual detected something foreign, something dangerous that wasn't going to leave your body without a fight. There is a reason you were out for 3 days, Harry." The depth of the man's casual statement, the sheer magnitude of the revelation, was a second wave of shock. He felt hollowed out, betrayed by his own history. "But why? How did I survive?" "You were dying," Tom said simply. "Agonizing pain was ripping through you, and at first I didn't understand. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late to undo the path we had started on. Your magic wanted to be free, unrestrained by my soul's presence, so I did what I had to ensure the survival of my vision." Tom swallowed heavily as he turned his attention back to Dumbledore, jabbing his wand under the old man's chin with enough force to make Dumbledore's eyes raise up sharply and meet his own, a look of cold fury in the crimson depths. "You cannot turn my apprentice against me, you fool, because you are missing a key component to this story, Dumbledore. The piece you, in your arrogant certainty, failed to account for. The part where my apprentice is no longer a Horcrux." Dumbledore's eyes widened marginally, and he attempted to protest. "Impossible." "Maybe for the close-minded, like you, Dumbledore." Tom scoffed, before his eyes returned to his apprentice. "Harry, you have seen me absorb a Horcrux. You saw how painful the process was. But what you could not have known is that there is an even more painful process to absorbing them beyond fancy spell casting." Dumbledore said it, but the word didn't make sense in Harry's ear. "Remorse." Tom raised his wand at the old man, as if he was gesturing to the fact that the wizened wizard had won a prize. "You're right, Dumbledore. As Harry lay dying, and I found myself helpless for the first time, I found something within me I didn't think I was capable of, and what rose from the ashes was magnificent." Tom's eyes, those deep, intense pools of emotion that mirrored the turmoil of his own dark soul, drifted towards Harry's once more, a silent plea for understanding passing between them. The confession he was about to make was monumental, a deviation from the cold, ruthless path his older self had trod. "I didn't want to see you in pain," he admitted, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried the weight of his genuine distress. "You were more than just an asset, Harry. You were the follower, the willing heir to my dark legacy, the apprentice I had always envisioned, the friend I never had," he elaborated, the word friend feeling alien yet profoundly true on his tongue. It wasn't a connection based on manipulation or fear, but one forged in shared ambition and unexpectedly loyalty. "You were loyal to me, Harry, truly loyal. You did everything I asked without question, without faltering. The thought of losing that, losing you, because of a horrific blunder committed by the man I would become, was unbearable." His jaw tightened, a shadow of fierce protective instinct passing across his face. "I couldn't let my older self's mistake, the creation of that accidental Horcrux within you, cost you your life, and more importantly, cost us our future together. The shared destiny we are meant to forge." Tom leaned closer, his expression intense, the raw honesty in his eyes inescapable. "And when I felt these emotions, this profound, protective desire to shield you from harm, the established magical link between us, the one I had forged violently broke. The moment it shattered, I felt a terrible, wrenching sensation as I drew in the essence of that fractured soul. I absorbed the accidental Horcrux, Harry. I took the fragment of his soul into myself, ensuring that you were free, whole and utterly mine, safe from the repercussions of my mistake. Impossible, Dumbledore whispered. Just because you say that does not make it so, Professor, Tom spat back. Both wizards turned their heads towards Harry now, their expressions holding mixes of uncertainty, clearly wondering where his mind had wandered. The truth was, his mind was a storm, a chaotic maelstrom of implications, power, and the terrifying, exhilarating reality of the path he had chosen. But the sudden, deafening roar of the multiple fireplaces across the atrium shattered his final musing. It was the sound of new arrivals of a ministry in panicked mobilization. Aurors began spilling out of the emerald flames, one after another, their faces grim and their wands already drawn. The cascade of magical law enforcement seemed endless, a purple and black tide washing over the marble floor. Even the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge, seemed to stumble, stopping dead in his path. All of them, the Aurors, the head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and the minister himself, were speechless. They were frozen in place, their arrival curtailed by the sight of the confrontation. The legendary Albus Dumbledore, looking older and more haggard than any of them had ever seen him, standing opposite, disarmed and defeated. With a cold, deliberate resolve that belied the swirling chaos inside, Harry raised the long, elegant wand directing its lethal, pale wood toward his former headmaster once again. The air crackled with the latent energy of the most powerful wand in existence. A voice, deeper and colder than his own had ever been, tore from his throat, echoing unnervingly in the sudden, absolute silence of the atrium, the silence broken only by the crackle of residual magic from the Floo network. "I'm going to kill you, Dumbledore," Harry announced, the words a decree. His eyes, the startling emerald of the killing curse, met the defeated blue of Dumbledore's. "After tonight, no one in any corner of this world will ever again question the power of the Dark Lord. They will not question our powers." He took a slow, menacing step forward, savoring the shudder that ran through the ranks of the ministry officials. "After tonight, if they speak of your name, if they recall the great Albus Dumbledore, they'll speak only of how you were brought to your knees. They'll speak only of how the greatest wizard in a century begged for the swift relief of death." Harry's lip curled into a terrible, triumphant sneer. "And I, being a merciful Dark Lord, having granted you the stage for your final humiliation, will have graciously obliged." "Do it," Tom commanded unflinchingly. "Avada Kedavra," Harry roared out with the long white wand, striking the old man down in a flash of green light. Cries of panic were heard across the chamber, and dozens of wands were now pointed towards Harry and Tom, who stood at the opposite end of the ministry atrium. Any other wizard, faced with the overwhelming presence of the ministry's law enforcement, would have undoubtedly succumbed to panic, their composure dissolving into frantic, desperate attempts at escape or defense. But not Tom. Instead, the Dark Lord merely elevated his chin, a slow, triumphant smile blooming on his lips. His eyes, now burning with a cold, clear focus, locked onto Harry Potter for a fleeting moment, a look that conveyed a profound sense of pride and an almost paternal gratitude for the successful and brutal execution of the task he had been given. With an unnerving calm that belied the danger, Tom began to stride out of the ruined atrium and across the rubble-strewn floor towards the formidable line of gathered Aurors. Every single one of them had their wands raised, the tips glowing faintly, trained with deadly intent upon his heart. He was utterly blocked, a captive in the center of their well-executed cordon. Yet the Dark Lord held his unnerving smile, his posture radiating an invincible confidence that seemed to push back against their combined magical might. He made no move to lash out with his own wand in defense or aggression. Instead, with deliberate slowness, he raised the dark yew wand and pressed the tip of it firmly against the skin of his left forearm. The simple, deliberate act was a stark signal of his readiness, not for a duel, but for the next, critical phase of his grand plan. A moment of silence stretched, thick and heavy with anticipation, the only sound the ragged breathing of the Aurors and the slight, unsettling hiss of power gathering at the tip of Tom's wand. He was inviting the confrontation, fully prepared for the world to witness the culmination of his genius. A war does not need to follow the death of your once-upon-a-time hero, Tom said simply. Your side would fight valiantly, I am sure, but I do not wish this. Every drop of magical blood spilled is a terrible waste, and I assure you the bloodshed would be unfathomable. The Aurors all shifted at this, and Tom raised his arms in a sign of peace. I will make it simple. I know that many of you will want to fight. Some of you may even think that to fight is wise, but this is folly. Tom gestured towards Harry. This boy was once a beacon of hope to the wizarding world, and look where he stands now, my own apprentice. If he can change, if he can bow, all of you can as well. Do this and none shall be harmed. Silence followed the man's words, and Harry stepped forward, addressing the crowd of Aurors for the first time. Resist, and we shall kill every man, woman, and child that stands against us. It is your choice. A tension in the air raised, and just as it seemed like one of the Aurors would raise their wand and kick off the fight, dozens of pops rang throughout the ministry and black-cloaked figures arrived behind Harry and Tom. The teen had hardly seen it, but clearly his mentor had been busy summoning his followers since the arrival of the Aurors, and now only death awaited those that stood against them. What's it going to be? Tom asked in a raised voice, his own wand moving ever so slightly forward, his grin present, as he prepared to unleash his magic upon the arriving Aurors with his Death Eaters at his side. Harry watched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach, as the silent war abruptly turned not with a flash of green light, but with a horrifying, silent psychological defeat. He hadn't seen a spell or heard an incantation. Perhaps there wasn't one. It began subtly. First, a grizzled Auror near the front lines. His face a mask of stoic determination, stumbled, his eyes going unfocused and glazed as if gazing into a distant, inescapable abyss. The movement was slow, almost ritualistic. His wand, a finely polished piece of redwood, slipped from nerveless fingers and clattered onto the stone floor with a pathetic sound that seemed deafening in the sudden, eerie silence that had fallen over the courtyard. Then, the Auror's knees buckled, and he sank down, his head bowing low over his chest in a posture of complete, abject submission. One by one, the contagion spread. It wasn't a physical blow, but a soul-crushing wave of despair, amplified and directed by Tom's terrifying power. Those who wanted to resist only managed a few ragged gasps of defiance before their own wills crumbled. Their arms trembled, and the same vacant, defeated expression settled upon their faces. The rhythmic clack-clack-clack of falling wands became the macabre soundtrack to their surrender. It wasn't long, mere heartbeats, though it felt like an eternity, before the last pockets of resistance dissolved. The entire force of highly trained, veteran Aurors, who minutes before had stood tall and resolute, were now a mass of bowed figures, humbled and broken. Not a single soul among them remained standing. Tom, standing tall before the kneeling ranks, surveyed the scene with a dark, breathtakingly arrogant smile. His robes stirred gently in a non-existent breeze, and the silence seemed to thrum with his immense, satisfied power. He didn't even need to shout. His voice, smooth and chillingly triumphant, cut through the oppressive air. "Victory," he declared, his voice rich with finality and echoing slightly off the ministry atrium walls, "is ours."